Stiefel im Gesicht.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to another edition of Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is where we watch the real socialism, the real deal, not AOC, not CNN, not Bernie Sanders. We're not screaming about things that are socialist. We are actually doing the real deal. And when you watch Socialism Saturday, you are going to see some of the most dystopian shit that you have ever seen in your life. And then I want to remind you all that it's real. This is happening right now in this land of ours. And, you know, like this week, I'm going to be honest, I almost feel just slightly evil for what we're going to watch this week. Just slightly. You know, I mean, I'm not the biggest channel in the world. I have developed a very focused and niche audience of people who I believe actually understand nuance and context, of people who I believe want to dig a little bit deeper than the average people. And so I am trusting everyone to be adults this week about what we're going to do. Because I feel just like see, this is what gets me into trouble. Because even though I know these people are evil and they are destroying our entire way of life, and we should have absolutely no mercy on them at all. When I'm picking on smaller channels, there's just just a tinge of like, is this really a good idea? But yes, I think it is a good idea, because if you don't pick on them when they're small and growing, they might actually turn into significant channels and significant influencers. And so, and I also feel like if we're watching something called the Burn It Down Already podcast, in which has a couple of episodes that we're going to watch today, including Imagining a World Outside of Capitalism and Capitalism and Whiteness, you know, I feel like it's our responsibility to watch channels like this and see what they're actually saying, because it's obvious to me that these are real socialists. This is the real deal. They're putting this podcast together on the internet. I happened to stumble upon it because I was doing research this week looking for all of the obvious ways in which capitalism and whiteness are inextricably linked in these people's minds. And so I happened to stumble upon this tiny little socialist podcast, and I was like, who better to listen to than people who are actually on the ground, people who actually care enough about these issues to put together a podcast that they're putting on the internet and to have these conversations. So we're not listening to our typical book publishers this week. We're not listening to people presenting at a conference. We're listening to these two talk about socialism. How did I find it? I was literally just researching like whiteness and capitalism and all of the ways that socialists use those terms interchangeably, because you guys know there's been a lot of talk this week, and it is something that I actually did cover on my Substack. If you go to this article on my Substack, Whiteness Means Capitalism, I was doing a lot of research this week into how to explain to people that whiteness and capitalism in the eyes of the woke left mean exactly the same thing. And so I was just looking around for information. I've looked at journal articles, I've looked at websites, I've looked at publications that are all saying this. And by the way, I'm absolutely inextricably right about this link. And that's how I found this podcast. Is I literally was just doing research on this topic, and I happened to come across it. Now let's go to their about section. It's called the Burn It Down Already podcast. It has 2 subscribers and 17 views. The 2 subscribers are probably the hosts, I think we can surmise. No, not literally. Blake and Rachel, 2 millennials, tired of the current structures under which we exist, take on the challenge of breaking down complex topics like capitalism, imperialism, and colonialism, apply these concepts to how they're playing out in our lives, and ask us to believe in the possibility of imagining new structures not built on oppression. So on my Substack, guys, we've actually talked, if you go to, it's in the archives. I got to make a list in my Substack of all the articles you guys really have to read if you read nothing else. And on that list would be this article. Bing! Let me pop it in the chat. This article called The 4 Primary Goals of the Woke Left. in which I outline clearly exactly what I replied to Elon Musk in this tweet, that the 4 goals of the woke left are: gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. Those are always their goals. Those are forever their goals. Every single thing that they do leads up to one of those goals at all times. If you view what they're doing through this lens, then you will understand exactly why they do all the crazy shit that they do. And so when I see a small little upstart podcast saying that they just want to believe in the possibility of imagining new structures not built upon oppression, then we have to assume that they're going to talk about gaining as much power as possible, destabilizing the system. What do they consider oppressive? Capitalism. They're going to talk a lot about capitalism and ushering in their Marxist utopia. And I've got a couple episodes pulled up here. I've got their second and their third episode that I thought would be worth a listen. And their second episode is called "Imagining a World Outside of Capitalism." And this is the one that resulted in me finding them. Capitalism and whiteness. Capitalism and whiteness. No, I will not be changing it to dystopia because they do not believe that it's a dystopia that they're ushering in. They believe it's a utopia. They literally do use the word utopia. And so, no, we're not going to change that, but I appreciate the suggestion. And so I thought we would just kind of sit back and listen to these episodes and hear what these guys are talking about. Now, I say they're obviously real socialists because they quite frankly look like socialists. They have the socialist vibe. Those of you who have been on a few Socialism Saturdays know exactly and precisely what I mean by the socialist vibe. It's like they never wear makeup except for lipstick. She's got the red lipstick. This is the only makeup that these people wear. They always wear beige clothes. They look like they've been unwashed for like a long, long time. And I'm sure these two people are two very nice people. They're probably useful idiots. But I think it'd be great to we're going to sit back and we're going to listen to them explain their ideology to us. And that is the purpose of Socialism Saturday. Because if you just allow these people to talk, they will tell you what they're trying to do. It's overt. They don't hide it. They don't use code words. When you listen to the real socialists, they will tell you exactly and precisely what's going on. And that's why we listen to them. Because where these people are at today is where the Democratic Party is going to be at in 3, 4, 5 years. These people are who the Democratic Party takes their talking points from. It just takes a couple of years in order for it to make its way into the mainstream. So what we're watching is a literal sneak preview of what's coming, and that should terrify everyone. People are asking if we have socialism bingo in the chat. Yes, we do. Because I made a socialist bingo card with the help of Sin. Shout out Sin, not too long ago. And if you want to play Socialism Bingo, you just follow the link that I just put in the chat right there. Click Generate Card. Every single card is unique. You get a free space in the middle. And then we're going for lines or we're going for corners. And if you get a bingo, just shout it out. You don't win anything, except it's just something to keep us kind of occupied. After we get a bingo, you're going for blackout bingo, and no, yeah, and then if you just shout out bingo in the chat, you're going to get a hearty round of congratulations. It's just to keep us interested and entertained. We're watching socialism here, guys. It's not always the easiest thing to do. I also just want to let everyone know before we get started, I just barely actually. Hang on, let me fix this real quick because I just barely on my actively Unwoke Substack. Hang on. Now if we refresh, bing. I just barely sent out my Unwoke Roundup for the week. The Unwoke Roundup is basically a newsletter that I do every single week with all of my coverage of woke insanity for the past week. Now, you guys know I've been pretty sick the last couple of weeks. My voice has really taken a hint. You can probably even hear it now. Like, it's already hard for me to talk, and we've only been streaming for 12 minutes. There are some things that I just can't do right now, to include like recording as many podcasts as I want or finishing the Schools Exposed program, which I've been trying to launch for a couple of weeks. I'm fairly sure I got COVID. I really am. But but I think I'm getting over it. I think things are getting better. And so what you're going to see in the roundup this week is a lot of written work and some streaming, but I'm trying to do easy streams just like this one where I'm kind of reacting to stuff. I do want to thank you guys for your patience in terms of like, I don't have the podcast recorded that I wanted to record. I'm still kind of just holding off on recording my school's exposed program, which should be getting launched basically as soon as I get my voice back, just because I don't want to record when I'm sick and have sick voice be what it is forever. But I'm working through it, guys. It is what it is, and I do appreciate your patience. But I have here just a roundup of what we've been doing in the last week. So I did write this article about capitalism and whiteness and explaining why the Black police officers can be considered white supremacists. If you're curious about what that means, this also outlines what systemic racism actually is. I did a stream about that as well, kind of reading it if you'd prefer to listen to it. I wrote the next article in the Woke Mind series, which is about outrage addiction and stuff like that. We're going to get to the rules for a second, but there are not no rules. Don't lie. If you want to know what an outrage addiction is or how they become addicted to it, I explain the psychology behind the outrage addiction in that article. You can find that on the Substack now. I launched my next workshop program, which is going to be all about mastering psychology. I am a total psychology nerd. As you guys know, I'm a psychologist in real life. And so I'm going to teach you how to master your own psychology in this workshop. You can find out more about it on the Substack. We also streamed Chris Rufo taking over a woke college, which was awesome. We talked about how 86 Democrats voted to support socialism this week. And yesterday, I exposed exclusively, you are not going to find this anywhere else, audio of a GOP leader in South Carolina sabotaging a conservative mom who was running for school board. And this story is crazy. And if you don't believe that the Republican Party is corrupt and unsavable, then you need to read this and listen to the audio, because this mom, such a badass, she recorded everything. She caught her GOP leader on fucking audio, threatening her, badgering her, threatening to use lawfare against her if she didn't change her messaging to be more moderate. That's what the GOP is today. So you can read that on my Substack. Of course, we also did happy hour yesterday, which is the longest land blessing in the history of happy hour. Was yesterday. It was like half an hour long. I kid you not. It was the most insane thing. Of course, we're doing Socialism Saturday this week. And I want to let you guys know, I'm working on an article. Do you guys know how on Socialism Saturday, we've been talking about how the socialists want all kids to be born via surrogacy because they want to get rid of the biological family? Well, guess what? There was a medical journal article that came out this past week that was all about using corpses, donated dead bodies, in order to gestate children like incubators. This is an idea that is quite literally being floated in the medical community right now. They want to gestate kids in dead bodies. I'm not making that up. And I'm going to cover that this week on the Substack. It's an article that I'm working on right now. I'm also working on articles about how they're hiding critical race theory in school. There's been some great reporting on that lately. So that's all going to be on the Substack, guys. If you have not yet subscribed to the Substack, please do so. You can subscribe for free by going to Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. The link is in the description below. And if you are a paid supporter on my Substack, now you can't see it here because I'm not looking at this in a paid supporter window. But if you are a paid supporter on my Substack, and I do want to get 50 more paid supporters this month to kind of keep me on track with where I want to be in order to be able to support this work full time. If you scroll down to the bottom of the email, so down here, under supporter perks, you're going to be able to find access to my supporter Discord. You're also going to be able to find the Zoom links for the 2 community Zoom calls that I do every single week. And you get access to these if you're a supporter on my Substack, if you're a supporter in my locals, or if you're a supporter in my Patreon. Okay, so if you're a supporter on my Substack, you will get access to those Zoom links. It's going to be at the bottom of this newsletter. If you're a supporter in my locals or my Patreon, don't worry about it. I will be posting those links as well. We are watching Romancing the Stone tomorrow in my supporter Discord. I wanted to watch Dirty Dancing, but we did a poll. People voted for Romancing the Stone. Fine, whatever. It's Valentine's month, so we're watching some romance movies this month. We do movie night every single Saturday at 8, or excuse me, every single Sunday rather at 8 p.m. Sunday. There it is. Sundays at 8 p.m. in my supporter Discord, and you can come and join us for having a movie night. And we watch different movies every week, and they're really fun. And we do movie trivia, and we have conversation about it, and it's awesome. And the link will be in the bottom there. And if you are a member on one of my other sites, I will be emailing that out tomorrow, and we'll watch a nice little romance, Romancing the Stone, tomorrow at 8 p.m. All right. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I apologize. Good afternoon, Miss Borisenko. I hope you're doing well. What is the relation of the actual left in the USA with a living historical figure like Ralph Nader? I'm not sure I know how to answer that question, to be honest. I haven't even thought about Ralph Nader in a really long time. And so I'm sorry. I wish I could answer the question for you, but I can't. I mean, I think that Ralph Nader is more progressive, right? He was like a Green Party candidate. So I would say that he is probably, God, don't hold me to this, but you sent in a super chat, so I want to try to answer. I would say he's probably more left than the actual left, but probably not as far left as the ones we're going to watch today. Okay, but other people in the chat might have other opinions about this. So I would say that he's a little bit more left than average, but not as far left as the real socialist that we're going to watch today. He's more of like a progressive. So there are different levels of this. The average left in the United States right now is left of center, but they're really more moderate. Then you have the progressives. The progressives do not like the Democratic Party. And then you have the socialists, and the socialists really do not like the Democratic Party. So it's just varying degrees of where they are, but I appreciate the super chat. All right, guys, please mount that like button if you would be so kind. We're going to get Socialism Saturday going. Rules of the chat are: don't be a dick, no whining. I do not have an unmoderated chat. We want to keep things nice for everyone. This is about learning. This is about listening. This is not about shit posting. We can do the shit posting on Twitter. All right. Here we're listening and learning and trying to have a good time. And we're drinking some beer. I'm going to be drinking a strawberry fluffernutter. This is from Branch Blade Brewing. If you're drinking something fun, let me know. But this is a time to chill and relax. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people in the chat. And if I ask you to stop doing something, I don't want to see any whining about it. Okay? Like, again, we are not children. We are adults here. So don't be a dick. No whining. We're going to get along just fine. And if this is your first time at Socialism Saturday and you don't understand what they're saying or what they're talking about, don't worry. We'll help. It's completely natural. Socialists tend to use completely different language than normal people. So it might sound like they're speaking English, but they're not really speaking English. It takes time to acclimate to it. So just sit tight. You will learn it. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat. We will try to decipher as best we can, but there is a little learning curve when you first start watching socialism. All of us have been through the learning curve that have been here for a minute. And so we're happy to help you learn, but please feel free to chat in questions if you have them. Sin is drinking a dark cherry hard cider. Sin, is that like the 1911 one? Because I was looking at that in the store and the can looks really cool. And I was thinking about buying that. Let me know how that is. We've got some Verdi from Incognito, coffee, Earl Grey tea. I love Earl Grey tea. It's my favorite. Windsor and Diet Coke. Michelle's drinking red wine. Bod also has a Diet Coke. Ghosted Jaeger. Oh my goodness. Cabernet. Lots of good drinks going. Let's see. Yes, you can make fun of the people in the podcast. You just can't make fun of other people here. Alec is drinking a vodka soda. Excellent, guys. Excellent. Oh, Angry Orchard. They're not bad. They're not bad at all. All right, guys. Let's get this party started. We're going to start with, I'm hoping to watch 2 episodes tonight, but we're going to start with episode 2 of this podcast, Imagining a World Without Capitalism.
Hello. Welcome to
their sound is good. That's always nice.
Ever episode of the Burn It Down Already podcast. My name is Rachel Rothenberg, and I'm here as always with my lovely co-host Blake Kelly. How are you, Blake? What's going on?
Ooh, that sounds good, Shannon.
For those that can't see my face when you did the second ever thing, I did this like weird little, I think like I think almost like a Nixon impersonation, like with the two.
I'm a big fan of doing this.
Yeah, what is this called?
For people listening, we're doing the victory sign, peace sign.
but with both hands, both hands in victory. I think it's very much like I think of Nixon when I think of that. I don't think he's the one that like did it, but
no, I know what you're talking about. I always think
this is really good.
The like Gen Z memes about like leaving the Zoom call and you don't really know what to do, so you're just like,
wow.
That's really.
I just have to comment. This beer literally does taste like peanut butter and jelly. It really does. Again, this is a strawberry fluffernutter, so it's like supposed to be peanut butter and strawberry jelly and marshmallow fluff. It really does taste like a peanut butter jelly. Congratulations, Branch Blade Brewing.
That's really funny.
Yeah, but what's up? What has been going on with you this week? What are you thinking about?
I mean, I think a lot of it, what I've been thinking about is, well, I just bought Trisha Hersey's Rest is Resistance book, and I know I mentioned that in the last podcast episode from a podcast she was on. But I think that like interludes.
He
really
does have
well
frosted tips. I haven't seen that in a minute,
potentially
Steve.
our follow-up episode today, which is kind of
good observation.
Structured as like, what does it mean to imagine a world outside of capitalism, or what does that really look like? Because it seems really ambiguous because it's hard for us to parse out like what is and isn't capitalism.
Yeah, that's something that we talked about before, right? This idea of like, you and I sat down to try to think about, okay, how are we going to talk about capitalism, or like, how are we going to define it, or how are we going to think about it? And we kind of were like struggling, didn't we? Even though like, I think we're both people who have like a good sense of like, we could explain the economics to you, right?
Yeah, it's sort of that analogy I think I used with you, or I mentioned with you too, is like, when a fish is swimming in water and you are asking how's the water, it's like you don't, like you're in it, like you don't, like what do you mean, like they don't know that they're in water. It's
yeah.
There's the socialism bingo card again for anyone who missed it.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's something that because capitalism is like, I always think of it as like this octopus, right? That's got all these different tentacles, and the tentacles have this long reach, and maybe one of them is like market systems, right? Which like maybe people are familiar with, thinking about like, okay, free markets, private property, like private ownership of the means of production, all of this stuff. But it also really touches sort of every aspect of how we live our lives, because so much of how people live now is organized around how to be a good worker, right? That's the supreme.
How
like,
so?
That's yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it gets kind of meta too, because it's almost like it's this underneath the surface sort of thing. Like, like when you're in school or when you're being raised and everything, it's like our orientation to growing up and being adult is around how to be a good worker.
Right.
How
I
so?
mean, even in our educational system, right? It's about making you functional enough.
They're arguing that our educational system reinforces capitalism. I don't think so. Disagree.
To go and work at your job. It's not so much. And also, right, like going along with that, how to go and work at your job and not ask questions, right? Like not really think about, okay, why am I feeling so miserable? Why am I so tired? Why am I not having fulfilling relationships? Right.
It's not your job's responsibility to give you fulfilling relationships.
Something that I've internalized is that those feelings of misery and unhappiness or alienation are not due to something structural, but because somehow you failed as a person, right? And if you can optimize yourself, then
yes, you have an individual responsibility for that.
Be somebody who like has magically being beaten down, right? Like you have been able to figure this out, but ultimately it's a goal that's not achievable.
And I think the struggle that I face consistently too is like, knowing that we operate in this capitalist framework, how do we as individuals like even attempt like this idea of, you know, not abiding or not not really like giving our power to the system that we inherently are forced to live in, and what can be done like because of that. And you know, I think a lot of it really comes down to like, you know, like, okay, well, like I was reading the first chapter of Rest as Resistance, and like the first chapter was like a lot of the pushback that she receives is like, okay, well, I have to pay bills, right? Like I have to still operate in this world, and like what does that really mean? And you know, even to me, it's kind of like how it's the struggle of like, okay, I know that I don't want to abide by this system that inherently creates a paradigm where our value systems as a society and how we are revered is based on productivity and effort, and that effort like means self-esteem and self-worth. And how do we build something outside of that, like while we're still inside of it at the same time?
Yeah. I feel like I don't think there's a right answer on how to do this, other than, you know, and this is something I think we've talked about, this idea of thinking about what is it that I can achievably do, right? And what is it that I can sort of make myself responsible for, and what can I what can I recognize as part of a structure that is far beyond me, right? It's far beyond me as an individual. And, you know, because I think that it's very easy for people to start to feel, people who are becoming involved in this work, it's very easy for us to start to feel guilty, right? Where it's like, we're not doing enough, or we're not self-actualized enough, right? Or, we haven't processed enough. And you know,
so these people are basically looking for socialism to do the personal development work that they refuse to do themselves. Like, your attitude and your outlook and how you feel about yourself is no one's responsibility but your own. And guess what? No one can fix it but you. You can read about capitalism all you want. You can read about the structural inequalities of society all you want. But at the end of the day, that's not going to make you change how you feel about yourself. You are the only one who can do personal development to work on yourself and your perspective and your attitude, and nothing can ever change that.
you know, I think it's always good to think about where you fit in these sorts of paradigms, but also, right, recognizing that like capital has a vested interest.
There's nothing wrong with self-help.
Offloading feelings of guilt and shame and like responsibility.
Capital does not have feelings.
Who ultimately, right,
money does not have feelings.
Have power, but in terms of institutional power, it's not there. So like, I don't know what to do with that necessarily, and like I don't know where sort of empowerment comes from, other than from like finding people who are in the same kind of, having the same kind of feelings as you, and being like, okay,
see, these people don't want to take personal responsibility, and this is part of the problem, and this is why you're going to see a lot of socialists that look quite frankly goddamn crazy. They have no desire to take personal responsibilities over their life, because taking personal responsibility would require that they take responsibility for when things aren't going like they wanted to. Amazon Eve is a trans maxer, and apparently Amazon Eve, who pretends to be on the right on Twitter, is also against capitalism. Is that what you're telling us, Amazon Eve? You don't like capitalism? What would James Lindsay think about that, Amazon Eve? This person, I can't say woman because I don't want to accidentally misgender. Literal transmaxer right here. Transmax incel. Welcome, Amazon Eve. We're glad you're here. Tell us more about why you hate capitalism. I'll be sure to pass that information on to James Lindsay. No one time out, Amazon Eve. No one do it. I want Amazon Eve to explain to us exactly what they don't like about capitalism.
How can we build this kind of mutual world together
this
that
movement
presents some
and
alternative?
in this community. And I think that's also part of the reason why I feel this podcast is relevant to us starting it, because I do think that there are a lot of people out there doing this work, even if it's not named in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think that it's an opportunity for people to feel connected in that work, when I don't think there's enough media or messaging about this that is not, I just don't think there's enough out there around it. And we're not necessarily talking about it in the same context, because it's very easy, like I follow Anti-Capitalist on Instagram, and they have all of these great memes or these great things that talk about,
I should start following Anti-Capitalist on
military
Instagram.
budget spending and the military industrial complex and all of these like super highbrow things that do implicate and do talk about the reasons why we can't, why we don't have the sort of, I don't know, like a different structure. But at the same time, it's like, what does that really mean for everyone's, everyday lives? And I think that's something that I'm running up against a lot, is like having to let go of this idea that I'm going to be, that like, I'm going to be like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Like, because I've internalized
really good tip, Barb,
and to be a productive and hard worker, like, what does it mean for me to now not be respected for that anymore?
Yeah.
Why do you care what other people think?
I think that's something that's something that very much resonates, I think, with me, and it's definitely something that
I'm gonna have to think about that one, Barb.
Stuff about work, and it's hard because, right, like even as you sit and you talk about, right, breaking down these structures and what like work as personhood does, it's still very easy, I think, to even bring that into you can even bring that into your like organizing work. Like you can bring that thing of like, I need to be productive, I need to be a hard worker, into like,
I just want everyone to acknowledge that Amazon Eve does not deny being a transmaxer.
And I see it all the time, in
because Amazon Eve is a transmaxer
spaces where people are really sort of pushing themselves to exhaustion, trying to get things done. And I think, and some of it is this idea that, I mean, I think if you're really fired up about something, and when you're feeling that, it's easy to ignore the symptoms of your body and what your mind is telling you about slowing down. But I do think that, like, I always think about like things that my high school gym teacher would say. He'd be like, girls, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? This is a long historical movement. Take a nap,
I've always that. Whenever someone is like, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, but I'm like, but when does it end?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that, really resonates for me based on what you just said is like, it's a marathon, not a sprint, is just like, why am I always climbing this stupid mountain? Like, I'm like, can I get off? Like,
hang on. I'm getting an important question in the chat that has nothing to do with what we're watching, but something to do with what I said. A transmaxer is an incel on the alt-right that decided that they had to transition to be a woman in order to get sex, because it was the only way they were going to get sex is if they transitioned to be a woman. This is a real thing. I've written about it on my Substack. I did a deep dive into the transmaxing manual in my Substack. I've done several streams about it on my channel. Amazon Eve is absolutely a staunch defender of the transmaxing community, because Amazon Eve is a member of the transmaxing community in real life right now on my show. They haven't denied it.
that they think you mean like suicidality, and it's like, no, like I want to change the structure of like why we're like climbing this mountain that we do not need to be climbing.
Right.
To what?
But like
what
you're
would you prefer?
forcing me to, but telling me that's like kind of life. And I think that's kind of
what these people don't understand is that fulfillment in life only comes when you actually achieve something that is difficult to achieve. You are not going to live a happy and fulfilling life if you are just handed win after win after win after win, and you don't have to work hard, you don't have to struggle, you don't have to overcome obstacles. True fulfillment, and you guys can all check this based on your experience. Like when you achieve something that's really hard, when you climb that mountain, as he keeps saying, when you achieve something that you've had to work for and struggle for, and you know, you've maybe had failure here and there, and you've had to try over and over and over and over and over again, that achievement means something. That achievement, it's like when you're on like the Bad News Bears style, like kind of like losing team in the league, and then you come back and you win the championship. Those achievements mean something, and they mean more than when we're just handed something. Is it easy? Can you just snap your fingers and pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Well, no, of course not. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps requires an awful lot of work. Being an entrepreneur, starting your own business requires an awful lot of work. It requires far more work than working for someone else. But when you do it, the victory means so much more for you. And that's what these people do not understand. Is they want win after win handed to them with like not having to work to get there, not having to do anything to get there, because they have not developed resiliency to know that they can overcome obstacles and they can achieve great things.
the analogy of the sort of like fish in the water analogy of like, you don't know that you're in it, and then you're like, well, it's the water, and you're like, can I go to the other water? Like there has to be other water. Right.
Yeah, and I think that other, you know, the other side of the pool or whatever, you know, the other ocean, it's so close, it's so closed off and it's so inaccessible, I think.
And I want you to know, like, a lot of people that are coming out of college right now, and even quite frankly out of high school, they have this attitude. I do think it's important to hear this, because these aren't just two like crazy people on the internet. These two crazy people are representative of what is going on with younger generations who haven't been taught to work hard, who haven't been taught resiliency or things like that. And so hearing it out of their mouths, I think, is important for us to understand their perspective.
To the average person who, you know, wants to feed their family and have a little money fun money left over, you know, it's just not, it's not something that is, I mean, to me, like, even as you're saying this, and even with, you know, what the reading I've done, the things that I, you know, the things that I know about the world, I'm sitting here and I'm like, it feels so far away, you know, and I know that it's not, you know, I know that with the right, I mean, again, it's like, if we just worked hard enough, we could get there, you know, but like,
right.
Like, I think the way that we're conditioned is,
this is how
so
average socialists talk.
See that other side of the pool is now how I'm thinking about it. Like, it's just, it's not there. There's no way to move beyond that. And yeah.
Because I think that we have not been allowed to imagine what that really looks like feasibly.
Right. Yeah, of course. Because there's, you know, there's some structures that are just seen as self-evident, like rent and bills and all of this.
Yes,
know?
People always have to pay bills.
And it is, I think, for most of us, it is self-evident. It's like, we still have to pay our rent and things like that.
Yes, but you have to pay bills.
I don't think that imagining a world beyond that is, I don't think it is as far.
So in New Hampshire this week, the House, the Republican, well, not even just the Republicans, the House of Representatives in New Hampshire voted to basically ban rent control. So there was this whole debate going on, and this one fucking socialist that's like a representative in our state legislature, he got up and he said, people who are landlords don't own the houses. The people who built the houses own the houses, and therefore the landlords are just sitting on something that they did not build. And it's like, bro, the landlords have to pay the mortgage. The landlords have to pay the property tax. The landlords oftentimes have to pay the utilities. The landlords have to pay the upkeep on the property. They don't want to acknowledge that any of these things goes into like maintaining the structures that you live in and pay rent to. And when you pay rent, you're not responsible for maintenance to the property. You're not responsible for property taxes. You're not responsible for shoveling the driveway or like fixing things when they get broken. The landlord is responsible for that, but these people don't want to acknowledge it at all.
Far away as it feels to me sometimes like it is, you know, but part of it is that we have to be willing to have the conversation, and it might feel like scary or pie in the sky or whatever, but I think it's when you speak it into existence, it becomes a little more real.
Yeah. And I think that it's hard to have language around what that really looks like, because we haven't even been given the vocabulary or the space to name what it is that we are even experiencing, and the detanglement of
rent control. Yeah, I mean, well, they banned the city instituting rent control over landlords. So this is a good thing. It's a positive thing. The state can't tell the landlords what to charge to live on their property. Essentially, that's what it means when you're banning rent control.
Like life and structures from the inherentness of capitalism. Mm-hmm. So I think that like what we're doing is kind of the first step of saying like, how are we detangling like what actually is capitalism and what is like just our lives, and like how someone operates.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of putting it. And I think that when we talk about capitalism and when we talk about bringing down, like thinking about the structures and the way that we're thinking about like how are we imagining alternatives, I don't think we're necessarily imagining this kind of like possessionless utopia, right? Like this is something we talked about. We're like,
well, this is good. What are you imagining?
Money still has to exist in some sense.
Yeah, we're not advocating against the exchange of goods and services by any means. But what we are, I think, asking is what other things can we bring about that would make the world feel more equitable, more joyful, more I don't know. I mean, what do you think about this?
That's exactly right, John.
About.
Yeah, I mean, I think that...
And they agreed to the pay that they're taking from the company. They agreed to it.
There was this Bell Hooks quote that I saw last night, and I'm going to butcher it because I don't remember the full context, but basically the paraphrase is like, you have to have hope in order to make any sort of like political system change, because the system inherently wants you to feel disillusionment and despair. And I don't know if I could just, I feel disillusionment and despair often in our political systems. And I think that, I think that's a pretty universal feeling. It's the reason why Congress has such a low like approval rating, right? And mostly all presidents do too, is because there's just this overall disillusionment, I think, of the structures and the way that they have told us that they are supposed to be supporting us. And it's just very self-evident that they don't. And, that turns certain parties and certain people into certain political ideologies or in certain ways. And I think, I guess where I'm coming from about it is like, capitalism doesn't allow you to take the time to rest, to be able to organize, to be able to dream, to be able to have these conversations, because it relies on grind culture. It relies on...
Well, no, that's the worst possible interpretation of capitalism. And this is something that these people do, is they take something and they twist it to be the worst, most oppressive possible interpretation, because that's how they're choosing to look at it. People like this could really use with some personal development. Self-help is not a bad thing. Self-help is not an evil industry. Self-help can actually help you to empower yourself in the world and to see things in a way that's going to benefit you rather than a way that it's going to blackpill you. I just want to highlight, excuse me, guys, already losing my voice. Rick said, these people seem really nice. They're wrong, but nice. It's nice to be nice. I agree with you. And that's why I said at the beginning, I feel a little bit bad about watching this, but it's just like, I feel like these people are representative of like the average person that gets sucked into these socialist ideologies. I don't think that either of these people are bad people. I think they're useful idiots or useful innocents, if we want to be a little bit nicer, where they don't really understand what they're advocating for, and they think they're doing what they need to do in order to be a good person. I'm sure that these people would look at all of us that are watching this and say they're a bunch of like right-wing lunatic reactionary extremists, fascists or whatever, but I don't think these two seem like bad people. And I wish that I guess if there's one hope that I would have for these people is that maybe they look a little bit closer about the evils that their ideology has done to the world and look for a different way and understand how much power they really do have.
This idea that like, okay, like if I just have the side business, if I just do XYZ, and like the wellness industry has co-opted this as well. I'm not saying all wellness, but a lot of wellness industry stuff has taken upon this too, to like efficientize or optimize ourselves in a way that like we're always busy. And it's not, it's busy in the sense that we don't actually have the time to integrate and rest and like review and rethink.
The tragic thing is they're not bad people. They're not.
That we could be going about it. So the reason why we have even a hard time talking about this is because we don't feel like
most of the people who get sucked into this ideology, I really do believe, are not bad people. And they might have some good points. I agreed with their points about the military-industrial complex. I just think that they're going about it in a really incorrect way, and I think it's important for us to understand their arguments so that we can effectively maybe communicate with them. Like, I'm sure many of you actually have people in your life that are going to be really well represented by the people who are watching. Maybe they're your friends, maybe they're your family members, like a cousin or something here and there that like is on the verge of joining Antifa. And it's like, if you can listen to what these people are saying and then apply it to speaking to people in your own lives that are not bad people, that are just getting sucked into bad ideologies, maybe you can turn them around.
Is in the collective, like, haven't had time to rest to actually know how we would want to go about it. And like, we don't have time to really look into it and really like come up with this like slow sort of approach to it. And I think that seems sometimes anti-revolutionary because people are like, revolution, like, fuck the system, it's all gone, like, let's go. And I think that something that Trisha Hersey says in her book is just like, this change is going to be lifelong. And it's going to be like a gradual, slow build to something. But we can't expect that like you and I are going to be able to come up with like, oh, we've rested enough, so we magically know what it means to imagine this world outside of a capitalist structure that we've only ever known.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for people who are in the position, and this is something I encounter all the time in academia, right? Because academics, and I think I would include myself in this, and I think it's something that I always
She's
have
an
to
academic.
sort of like work on or think about, that we see ourselves as sort of the vanguard of whatever movement is coming because we have the space to do the most reading, right? We have the space to have these kinds of theoretical conversations, which like obviously somebody who's working like, 2 or 3 jobs is not going to necessarily be able to to have those kinds of conversations or have the space to do all that theoretical work. But I think most people are, I think almost everyone who has ever worked a job or has ever been in a position of like having to sell their labor, they're equipped with the tools to have these conversations. You don't need to read, Marx or Engels or Hegel or whoever to be able to identify where the structures are fucked up, because we feel in our bodies that it's fucked up, right? So I think for me, something that I'm always thinking about is how do I resist the narrative of like professionalization? How do I resist the urge to want to vanguard things? Because I think then it falls into this kind of hierarchy that reinforces these structures where some people have space for thinking and dreaming, even if it's a very small amount of space, right? And some people, that's just closed. That is, they're thinking and dreaming all the time, but the capacity to make that heard in sort of public space is just shut off. And so it's really important to me to to not think about myself as like you said, like the revolutionary vanguard of resting, right? Like I don't want to fall into that trap, because I think that everybody has the capacity to understand and talk about this. It's just like, where do we create that space for people to feel heard and to have those conversations with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, to me, it's almost like if everyone is allowed to have that sort of rest space to do it, capitalism would crumble, because then it's not about being like, oh, we're changing the system. It was like the system would just be obsolete. Like it would just it wouldn't be able to function, because people would be able to actually take time and be with themselves.
We have an agreement.
And
hallelujah.
And not even from okay,
we
now
agree on something, Amazon Eve.
So this is really interesting. I didn't think I was going to mention this, but earlier this year I took FMLA from my job, and I had some time off work, and I named my mental health as a reason for that. And it was approved, and I took the time, and even during that time when I was like resting, oh my gosh, so much internalized capitalism and production of like, okay, now that I have this space, I have to do something.
Wait. So you conned your employer. Let me just get this straight, bro. You conned your employer into giving you FMLA leave, and went and took a paid vacation at the hands of your employer because you didn't feel like being a worker anymore, and then started to do your own work, even though the entire purpose of FMLA leave is to give you rest so you can recuperate. It sounds kind of like you committed fraud there, bro. If you took FMLA leave to go and do other forms of work because you didn't want to work for your employer anymore, that's fraud. Congratulations. I'm not saying, like, I don't really care either way, but like it's a ballsy thing to admit on the internet.
I need to now come back and prove to the world, I don't whoever, that I have somehow done something productive with my time. And that was an alluring thing that kept on coming back to me, is that even though I've literally asked and dedicated space to rest, my internal system is nope, you're capitalism, my body is capitalism. And if you're not producing, there's shame, there's and it's not shame and I feel horrible about myself. It's that I I have been programmed and
Yeah.
conditioned to like produce. And I think that like something I'm trying to reorient myself
He
to
probably doesn't realize it, Reagan. You're
is
right about that.
what does it mean to create something that I want to be creating because I want to create it and it's fun, and allow that to just be and exist compared to like I need to produce something.
Yeah. Because because no matter what, it's labor, right? Even if you're doing something for yourself just because it's fun, right? You're still putting work into it, but it's work that doesn't serve anybody but yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't serve capital in any way. If you're writing or drawing or singing or something like that, right? Like if you're not selling it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And I think
oh my god, like if you're not also like in social media world, like not only if you're not creating it, but if you are not putting it on social media, then it does not exist, and it does not
I can agree with them that's
like,
fucked up.
And also if you're not marketing it, like if you're not like branding yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
Exactly.
listen.
Yeah.
Credit where credit is due. They have correctly identified that there is a problem with influencer culture online, and that there are an awful lot of people in the world that feel like if something is not on social media, it's not real life. I agree with that. I think there's a big problem with influencer culture online. I think there's a big problem with people feeling like they need to create personal brands and always have this like polished version of themselves where there's no authenticity at all. And one of the reasons that I've been really kind of unapologetic in terms of being authentic online with, putting my good moments and my bad moments and my happy moments and my sad moments, and sometimes getting emotional and sometimes getting and being yelling and stuff like that, is because I believe very strongly that there needs to be more authenticity online, so that not only people today can see other people being, dare I say, human beings, but I don't want history to look back on this time and the only thing that history sees is these polished influencer images online. I think it's kind of gross. And so that's another thing that we can agree with them on right there. At least I can. I don't know if you guys can.
I mean, if you're not optimizing yourself in some way, right, then it's like, what the hell's wrong with you? And when you were talking about when you were on leave and feeling shame, and then you were like, not shame in the sense of like feeling bad, but like it really resonated with me, because I think in moments where I have not been producing, or like I haven't been able to work at capacity, I often have felt sort of like, in a way, like sort of like my personhood is diminished. Like that's something that's
a you problem, not a capitalism problem.
And I'll tell I'll tell my therapist, for example, like if I'm talking about, oh, I didn't get enough done this week, and I was like, I don't really feel like a person right now. So like that, I don't know. I mean, but I think that because there's so much connection between the capacity to work and being recognized as a full human being. And we see it, for example, in the way that the state treats disabled people who are unable to work, right? People who can't work or are unable to work.
They provide for them.
That, like, their personhood is diminished, right? That they don't have enough to live on, right? That they're in this space where it's like, you're kind of worthy to be alive.
You make money by giving value to the world. If you don't give value to money, is just a value exchange, guys. If you give value to the world, you will receive value in return. If you give love and service to the world, you will receive in return. To make money, which is just, it's just like, consider it to be value, consider it to be something I find yarn to be valuable, consider it like to be the same as money. In order to make money, you need to provide a value in terms of a product or a service or content or something that people or education or something that people consider to be worthy of spending money on. It's like trading or bartering. It's like if you had this white yarn and I said and you said I really want that red yarn, you would give me the white yarn in exchange for the red yarn and we trade. It's exactly the same thing. The white yarn could be money. You give me money in exchange for the red yarn. It's exactly the same. What these people want is to exist in a world where they're just handed money without doing anything to earn it.
But like, and it's a thing that's so damaging to self-perception, and it's also, I think, really damaging to it's damaging to solidarity. Because if there's this category of like unpersons who are marked by their inability to produce, then it's like it sort of kills empathy.
Yeah, I think it
we're
really
not
also kind of
empathetic if we're not giving money to people.
Speaking of like tying personhood to ableism.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
In like internalizing capitalism as personhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was like, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure disabled people can earn money if they want to.
When you were speaking earlier about, telling your therapist of like, oh, if I don't feel at full capacity or if I didn't get enough work done, then I don't feel like a person. And I think it's like so difficult to kind of detangle that from who you are because, like, that's the only way that our system has structured us to receive care and love.
Exactly.
And it's not even about like
if you're against people getting money without earning it, you should be against people inheriting millions of dollars. No, I'm not against that at all because that money was earned. That money was earned by the people who earned millions of dollars. And then they spent that money in a way that they saw fit. They gave it to their friends. They gave it to their loved ones. They gave it to their family. They wanted to pass that money on to their kids. That money is still earned. Once you have money, you can do whatever the F you want with it.
rentalness or like family dynamics. I mean, yes, that comes into the family dynamic and like it is about family dynamics.
We mount the like button on my
really
channel, but I appreciate it.
Our societal structure is about that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and I think to ask a lot of people to say like, what would it mean for you to take away this golden nugget that you have literally been working on your entire life of saying like, I have built this
career.
Don't know
that. You don't know that. Maybe the people that they gave the money to were of great service to them. Maybe they took care of them in their old age. Maybe if a child takes care of a parent in their old age, and then that child inherits a metric F ton of money when that parent dies, that is still doing a service, man. Maybe they've done service by being loved ones. You're probably not going to give money to people who you don't have a loving relationship with, and love can be service. They're not doing something you consider to be work. But guess what? You are not the owner of other people's money. You are not the decider of how other people spend their money. And if someone is not providing value in the form of love or care or service to someone else, then they probably aren't going to inherit the money in some capacity. You are not the decision maker for other people. Let's see. I got a super chat coming in telling me I'm wrong, and I'm going to explain to them how they're not wrong, or I'm not wrong and they're not right. F in the chat, you're wrong. You can do good to the truth of your understanding in your heart. Don't expect rewards. Caring is just what you do. You are not understanding the analogy that I'm making. That's all right. You don't have to understand the analogy I'm making. But whether someone see, you guys are actually playing right into their trap. You guys are saying, only the things that I consider to be work are worthy of money. No. There are a lot of ways that you can provide value and service to people that has nothing to do with a job or anything like that. Millions of ways you can do that. And no, I do agree that you should not expect rewards. But the only way that you will ever make money is if you are doing something that someone else considers to be valuable or an act of service or something that it is a subjective thing. You don't get to decide for other people what they find valuable. You don't get to decide for other people how they spend their resources. That is exactly the point of all of this to begin with. These people want to decide for all of us how our resources are spent. I fundamentally disagree with this. I think that I am the judge of how I spend my resources. And if I provide things that are of value to you guys, oftentimes you guys will support me either with like a membership on one of my sites or super chats or things like that. And I very much appreciate it. But you wouldn't do that if I wasn't giving you something that you consider to be valuable.
I have built, you know, this whatever, like this family, this like whatever, all of these like identities of production that if you take that away, there's this sort of like emptiness or gap that is there in the meantime. And
hang on, Fish Addict's got a super chat. The consumer decides what has worth, not the producer. That's exactly right. The person spending the money decides what they consider valuable and what they don't. Who's glorifying rich anything? You don't think middle class people inherit money too?
And that's like really like that is what's scary. And I'm saying it to myself too, because this is the work that I've been trying to do over the past 2 years of like, who am I outside of my means of labor and my means of production or my ability to produce in this X amount of way. And I think to ask the collective, like the collective in general, to like accept or to
people complaining about inherited wealth are typically the people who are really jealous that they're not the ones inheriting the wealth. Life is not fair. Some people are dealt a better hand than others. Life is not equal. There are some people that are going to be born into rich families. That's just the way it goes. There's some people that are going to be born into middle class families. There's some people that are going to be born into families that are in poverty. And guess what? Capitalism provides us with the means where if you work hard and you show up consistently, no matter where you start out in life, you can become wealthy. How many stories are there of people who start out with meager beginnings and they end up becoming wealthy? Because it is possible if you show up and you work hard and you show up consistently. But the reality is that no one promised that everyone was going to start out on this in the same place. That wasn't a guarantee that was given to you ever in life. It's just reality that some people are going to be born into more advantageous circumstances than others. And guess what? Oftentimes, those people have their own set of challenges. They're different than the challenges that people who are born into poverty face, but they are still a set of challenges that they're going to have to overcome. Life is unfair, bro. If you fight that, if the battle you're going to fight is no one should be born into wealthy families, you're always going to lose. Rabid fan, based on the comments, you shouldn't donate money to charities because they didn't earn it. No, that is not true. You're not listening. If you're donating money to charity, it is because that charity is doing something that you feel is worthy of your support. That charity is doing something that you, as the spender of your money, considers to be valuable. Why on earth would you donate to a charity that you don't think is doing something worthwhile? That makes absolutely no sense. Thank you for the money. I appreciate it.
to distance themselves from this idea of worth and production is like it can be perceived as this complete collapse, right?
Yeah, because then it's like, again, it's that.
Oh, you meant effing comments. I'm sorry, I was condescending to you then, rabid fan.
if I'm not somebody who's made up wholly
I
of
misunderstood. My bad.
these like paradigmatic structures, right? A worker, a member of a family, right? Somebody who's productive in both like the capital sense, but also in like a reproductive sense at home, then like what am I?
Get a lot of super chats today. I really do appreciate the support, guys. Verdon, a person's children are an effort to participate in the next round of humanity. Resources like money or an education is an effort to enhance your play into the next round. That's exactly right. I love the way you phrase that. They're making an investment in their family, which they consider to be something worth spending money on, something that's valuable. If they didn't want to give it to their family, they give it away. They give it to charity. They give it to a better cause.
Because if you're somebody who, things like friend or caregiver or something, it's not easily monetized, so those sorts of things I think are often sort of put by the wayside. And that feeling of emptiness that you describe, I think, is something that resonates with a lot of people, because
no
ultimately I don't think worker as a category.
Sorry to disappoint. I'm a libertarian and I'm staying there.
Nourishing to the soul, or to the to your own like inner sense of self, whatever you believe in, right? And so I think oftentimes you hear people describing this profound emptiness that they have. And it's because, right, the way that we live now, I think it encourages the care muscle to sort of atrophy. And it's hard to sort of receive that care in ways that are healthy, because there's so much investment on either like a system that extracts from you in exchange for care. And that's something that can be both in capitalism or in the family, which often closely imitates capitalist structures. And that's really hard, because then it's like you don't have the skills. Even if you understand that something's wrong, you don't have the skills to kind of build that up. The skills just aren't there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like literally taking the fish out of the water, right? What is it
exactly.
what does a fish do when it's out of water? It flops around, right?
Yeah.
And like we don't know where the other water is, so it's like there has to be this sort of flopping around transition period, which is like.
No, I was on the left too. I was a Democrat for 20 years. It's just like, unlike Carrie Smith, I actually did leave the left when I said I left the left. I didn't just write an essay about being a former SJW and then continue to act like an SJW all over the fucking internet. I actually did leave, and I joined the Libertarians, and I am very, very happy with the Libertarians. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I appreciate everyone's concern. Murphy's Pool, it's nobody's effing business what other people do with money they have earned. That is exactly right. Guys, please mount that like button if you haven't already. This is Socialism Saturday.
Like selling it as like, hey, you're gonna flop around is not like a great sell for people.
Yeah.
And I think that is largely the resistance to the reason why system change doesn't happen, is because I think there is just some reality or acknowledgement that like, I don't like, you're gonna have to go through the fish flopping on the deck.
I was a paper candidate. It wasn't a real thing.
Transition.
So for those who don't know, I was the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire nominee for governor in this last election cycle, but it wasn't a real thing. I've actually made videos talking about this. It was literally just to have a name on the ballot. I didn't campaign or really do anything real with it. I had a little bit of fun with it. Who wouldn't have a little bit of fun with it? But we were putting all of our resources into the Senate race, and the Republican ended up not winning, and so there was that. But yeah, I ran. And I'm never doing it again, ever. I'm retired from politics. I know, it was real to all of us.
Into something new. And I don't think I think that has to happen, because if you just go into the other thing, like like, will you be able to operate in that world?
I would have
Like,
gotten more if they hadn't
I'm
sabotaged my
speculating
race.
here. I don't know if I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of talking
another
as it's coming up. I don't know if I've
loser
like fully
libertarian in
formed
New
this
Hampshire
thought.
sabotaged. I would have
But
gotten way more.
that's just what's coming to me as you said that.
Yeah. I think that period of like fish flopping on the deck, kind of like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on? I do think in some ways that is where we're at or where we're approaching. And I think it's a period that's very generative, but I think it's also a period that's very dangerous because capital and capitalism, right, understands that people, it's not like, you know, the powers that be, it's not like, you know, Bezos and Elon Musk and whoever. I mean, they know that people are miserable, right? And that's where
it is not your employer's job to make you happy,
right? That emerges concurrently, where it's like, we understand that you're miserable, we understand that you're unhappy, we understand that you feel alienated. You know, the answer to this lies in white supremacy rather than in building like mutually co-constituted networks of care. And for people that feel powerless, right, things like fascism, it's really seductive. And we see this over and over.
If you're a capitalist, you're a fascist.
And the question then becomes, right, like, what can you do, right, to sort of cut that off? You know, what can you do to make that sort of transitory period where, you know, people are like flopping around on the decks and everything is, you know, ideologically in flux, right? How do you help them see what the structures are? You know, how can people
hang on? Okay, so this is going to come in handy for the next podcast that we're going to watch after this in particular, but let's just get it out of the way and we'll reiterate it next time. Everyone was happy until those pesky white people came along? No. No, 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 no. When they say whiteness, when they say white supremacy, when they say racism, they do not mean skin color. And I know this is really confusing. It's meant to be confusing. They're trying to use language to confuse you. They do not mean white people. They mean capitalism. They mean who owns the power structure, who are the CEOs, who are the private property owners, who are the landlords. Whiteness means capitalism. And they're saying it in a way that is meant to confuse you. Don't be confused. Every single time these people use whiteness or capitalism in one of these presentations, they are using the terms interchangeably so that they mean the same thing.
See what the structures are, right? Rather than just go, I think, toward down the avenue of just rage, which ultimately, I think ultimately is destructive, right? Like fascism is an ideology of just like pure anger. And I think that anger can be really like generative and really productive, but it doesn't do any, it's damaging when the cogs in the machine see.
They believe that racism was created when Europeans came to America and brought slaves with them. They believe that's when racism was created. And racism is an extension of slavery because of capitalism. I've written about this on my Substacks. Exactly, Jacqueline. Exactly. This is why Black Republicans, or really any Black people that they don't like, can be white supremacists. That is exactly correct. But yeah, so capitalism is why white Europeans brought slaves to America, and that's why slavery, white supremacy, racism are inextricably linked to capitalism. Nope, don't lie. Don't lie. Don't lie. I've got your fucking number, man. I've documented this shit extensively. Don't lie. If that was true, then how can Black people be white supremacists? You might actually listen, because you're in our chat. And listen, I appreciate socialists coming to our chat and talking to us. I really do. Comrade Lenin is being very respectful, and I want everyone to be respectful of Comrade Lenin. As long as you follow the rules of don't be a dick and no whining, you're welcome here. I'm not going to turn people away. But if this was true, then how can black people be considered white supremacists? I'll wait for your answer on that one, comrade.
Things as they really are, is really not transparent to people. It's very easy to get them blaming immigrants or women or LGBTQ people.
Well, because at the end of the day, I think everyone feels I think everyone feels hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of heartache, I think, around.
Except, Comrade Lenin, you must have missed the Washington Post having a headline, and you can Google this, you can look it up, that said that said multiracial whiteness. Why was the Washington Post writing about multiracial whiteness? Why was the Los Angeles Times writing about how Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy? Why was CNN just last week talking about how 5 black police officers who murdered Tyree Nichols? Why was CNN saying that these black police officers were white supremacists and the act of murdering Tyree Nichols, which I unequivocally denounce, because one thing we can probably agree on is I hate the police probably just as much as you do. Why are those 5 black police officers considered to be white supremacists? I know why. I wrote an article this week about why. I explained it on a stream earlier this week why that is. It's because the function of the police is, in your mind, descendant from slave catchers and therefore is inextricably linked to capitalism. That's why.
I mean, everyone's lives, and
we're not your useful idiots, comrade. We watch this stuff all the time.
Intersectionality here of
intersectionality.
The system harms people in deeper ways than others based on the inherent structure. But everyone in some ways feels harmed by it, and people just, I think, in a lot of ways, want to feel in control, and they want to feel that their pain means something.
Mm-hmm.
And they choose to go about it by wanting to not recognize the pain, or by going the other.
Oh shit.
You're gonna think about,
fuck, I just lost our place. God damn it. That was my fault. We'll find it. Comrade, then why, if you don't care what the Washington Post says, fine, why did these people earlier in this presentation say that capitalism was in their body? Inextricably in their body. In fact, you know what, guys, why don't we just go on to the next one, because I know this is going to be a little bit of a longer Socialism Saturday, and they're not really saying anything that isn't the same thing. Does anyone have... I want to go to this one. This leads us... This is the one I actually wanted to watch. I just wanted to watch the first one as like a little bit of an intro. Let's watch their 3rd episode. If anyone has strong objection to this, we can go back and watch the other one. But they were kind of saying the same thing over and over again. And what I want to hear these people talk about is capitalism and whiteness, because I feel like that's going to speak to some of the concerns that Comrade Lenin has, where he's trying to convince us that white supremacy is just about black or white people thinking that they're better than black people, which it's not. Why are these people talking about capitalism and whiteness in the title of the podcast? Let's find out.
Already podcast. I'm your co-host, Blake Kelly, with Rachel Rothenberg. What's up? How's it going? How's life, Rachel?
I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Yeah, same. It's it's a misty and dark day in Chicago.
I'm glad we skipped ahead, because we still had an hour left in that other one, and man,
lights up and ready to record.
Yep. It's pretty well. Seattle's always that way, but it's felt especially drizzly lately. So
I have heard of people who claim to be libertarian socialists. I do not believe that libertarian socialists actually exist, because leftist anarchism is still opposed to private property, which isn't really anarchism. I'm sorry. If you are opposed to private fucking property, you still want some sort of state apparatus. But yeah, I do know what you're talking about. I deny its existence. It's not real.
mood altering fluorescence here, and
Well,
I'm good to go.
good. We were talking before we started and kind of after the second episode of, imagining a world outside of capitalism. And one of the things that I think that we talked about was like, it's really important to talk about the interlinking of whiteness and race into the capitalist system and how you can't really separate the two.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whiteness,
Look at
certainly in
that.
our last episode, was something that we kind of danced around when you're talking about like the grievance politics and the way that is creating the kind of current iteration of not just capitalism, but also the rise of fascism. And, for me, when I think about
there's no difference between those
the
two.
way that capitalism
We disagree.
works, it's really impossible to divide it from whiteness as a kind of a mechanism of creating order and creating.
I'm sorry, what was that? The way that capitalism works, it's impossible to divide it from whiteness. Please excuse me as I clip that. I'll just take 2 seconds. We're going to just rewind a little bit. I'm going to set up my magical clipping tool. Because that sounded a little bit like she said whiteness was capitalism to me.
The capitalist system and how you can't really separate the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whiteness, certainly in our last episode, was something that we kind of danced around when you're talking about like the grievance politics and the way that is creating the kind of current iteration of not just capitalism, but also the rise of fascism. And, for me, when I think about the way that capitalism works, it's really impossible to divide it from whiteness as a kind of a mechanism of creating order and creating hierarchy. And that's what race does in general, right? But I think it's really impossible to talk about how capitalism functions in people's everyday lives without talking about the role that whiteness has played in that.
Absolutely. And even more specifically, how like the current structures of capitalism were built hand in hand while slavery and while the country or people as a whole were basically, creating these race classifications as a way to force labor onto someone. And that in of itself, that like race was really invented like as a way to do that, as like a mechanism to force labor, and or from a way to ensure that hierarchy of that, like, some people will get something better than the other person, and then that creates sort of a hierarchy that you just kind of mentioned.
It's kind of like every time I say that whiteness means capitalism and capitalism means whiteness, it's kind of like these people who are real socialists think the same thing. Oh my word. Look at that. I told you guys, if we just listen, they will tell us everything that we need to know.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it is, right, how do you get people to buy into capitalism, right? How do you get people to buy into a system that prevents solidarity, right? And one of the ways that historically the capitalist class did that was through, right, the creation of racial hierarchies and this idea that, at least among white people, right, that even if you were being exploited, you at least had that form of social superiority to fall back on, right? And ultimately,
that's what they think white privilege means. Oh, I need to do
I think
captions.
Supersedes all other forms.
Sorry, guys.
Has superseded all other forms of solidarity, including class solidarity, right? Gender solidarity.
Absolutely.
People cling on to whiteness above, I think, all other forms of identity, because it's the one that it's whiteness is an
I'm pretty
overarching
sure I
system of
literally just
power.
proved it did based on the words of
And
your
power
comrades.
can feel really
comrade.
good. So, you know, when we think about what capital does, it kind of smokescreens itself behind that kind of the power of whiteness.
So eloquently stated. Yeah, and I think that before we get too far into this too, we were kind of talking about this before we got on, is like, we feel it's really important to mention that, like, I don't feel like I am an expert on talking necessarily, and I'm not the authority on talking about race relations or talking about, you know, like that this is what this is. This is just basically on my, you know, my own understanding of learning about it from other people, and then this is my reflection back to them, and those people I've learned from, you know, are predominantly people of color. And the other thing too is just that to talk about race, you actually have to be talking about whiteness. And I think that's what offers a potential unique, like, language for us to speak right now, because we can actually address more whiteness than it is talking about, quote, racism. Because, you know, without whiteness, I mean, maybe this is more of a thought I'm just saying now. Without whiteness, there might not actually be the racism in which we speak of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, you know, we're two white folks,
Right.
kind of, right, having
I just want to give a shout out to Mary over on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip, Mary. I really, really appreciate it. Mary said, when the socialists talk, their every phrase rises as if in question, almost as if they are testing to see how much they can get away with. But it sounds so insecure and pretentious, like girl freshmen at an Ivy. They can't speak in a natural way because the same lack confidence that causes them to reject capitalism also triggers in them an exaggerated fear of rejection. Mary, I think that's a really, really astute point, and I want to thank you for making it, and I do appreciate the support. Guys, in addition to streaming on YouTube right now, I'm also on Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, Getter. I stream a whole bunch of other places. The chat tends to be best on YouTube, so if you enjoy a good chat and the interaction, please head over there. But you're welcome to watch me on whatever platform floats your boat, and I do appreciate the support I get on Rockfin. All right, let's keep going.
This conversation with ourselves. And you know, the thing that I always tell my students when I'm teaching on colonialism or imperialism or
she teaches
or
in college.
The development of racial capitalism is I always
say,
right,
racial capitalism is fucked up.
I had to learn from others, right? What
teacher
this all is, you know, because whiteness is, I think, just like the way
probably
we talked about capitalism last time, whiteness can be a kind of fish in water thing where, you know, you just assume you're the default. You just assume that there's nothing about the way that you move through the world that really needs to be like interrogated or questioned. And that's also a function of whiteness and white supremacy, right? And
yeah,
so
even the idea that we aren't given like that.
Everything they don't like tends to be whiteness or white
both
supremacy.
In our early 30s, and like having to now figure that out in some way of like being like, oh, this is what whiteness is, and
it looks like she has
like
University of Washington or something like that in her background. That looks like a W, like University of Washington.
You to know those things, or even if they do, it's not. It's still talked about of like oh well, that's just the way it works.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the case. And it keeps you from thinking about what your role is in that too, you know? So what I always tell my students is I'm like, I'm talking about a particular set of experiences that I am.
Yep, that logo is University of Washington. That W in the background.
Like that I have only
right
come
here
to learn about in a second
University of Washington.
Obviously, right,
State University. This woman teaches at a state university.
Right, we are racialized in a particular way, and the way that
her name is Rachel. That's all I have to go on. I'm going into the directory.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of self-evident, and that also ties into, you know, our identities as Americans and our identities as, you know, people with a particular set of family histories, and those histories often kind of sort of deliberately
Rachel
separate us
thank
from
you. Appreciate it. Let's look her up.
from our context.
Rachel.
And so when we're talking
Rothenberg.
about this, I think we have to acknowledge that. I think for us and for many other white people, we're coming from, like you said, having to learn about our own contexts only after the fact, right? And we can talk about it now, but ultimately, right, we're learning primarily from scholars of color, from, activists and people who have
I don't see a Rachel
who have
Rothenberg at the University of Washington, but that
put
doesn't mean
energy and
anything.
time into describing these things because they had to, right? Because there was an
Mhm.
urgency for liberation. And and so what we'll try to do is to honor that when we have these conversations.
Yeah, one of the things that Tricia Hersey says in the Rest is Resistance book is that, like, the only way to talk about dismantling capitalism is to talk about it from it is rooted in like Black liberation, like specifically, and like it's from that Black liberation theory that all of this actually comes from.
Jesus Christ, Bot.
And so it's just important to.
This is why Bot is the chief investigative officer of the cult. Bot found this woman so fucking quick. Rachel Rothenberg, University of Washington, Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies, dissertation, family engagement with nationalist media in North India. She's a teaching assistant. Rachel's research interests focus broadly on issues of religious communalism and public religion in South Asia, particularly in Hindi-speaking areas in North India. Her current research focuses, why is she talking about this? A native of Pittsburgh, she holds a BA from the College of Worcester and a Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School. Fascinating. Fascinating. Why is she teaching about whiteness then? Bot already found her before I even started looking. Jesus Christ, Bot. Thank you for your service. And also, well done. Yeah, I heard they shot down that balloon. Biden said they'd been planning to shoot down the balloon since Wednesday. Why did it take 3 fucking days to shoot down a balloon? No, my husband is from Ukraine, and my husband has lived under communism in Ukraine because he lived there when it was still part of the USSR, and he remembers going and waiting in line for rations. So no, my husband does not want the Soviet Union back. My husband does not want any of this back because he's actually lived in it.
It's important to name that because, without it, it would be in some ways co-opting what the work, all of the work that's been done before.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to share a quote from Savala Nolan, who wrote a book called Don't Let It Get You Down, Essays on Race, Gender, and the Body. And it actually came out in 2021. Oh. And in this passage, she's talking a little bit about spending time with white friends in the South who had never thought about their families' legacies of slave owning and whether that was something that that existed or not. And just a kind of not an unwillingness to learn, but just an indifference to learning. And she has this this quote, right, where she's talking about people who, are largely indifferent to this. And she talks about her own family story as a Black woman, and the visceral sensations of, for example, hearing the tires of Klan members on the driveway of their family homes, like the Klan had shown up to threaten them, right? Being able to hear the crunch of the gravel, having this knowledge about legacies of slavery. And she says, there's no distant past. There is only the unending scream of the present. Some people can block the sound. maybe if I could, I would too. And it just makes me think a lot about that kind of curtaining off of history and the way that that's a mechanism. It's a mechanism of racial capitalism, right? That the only way that capitalism can function in a global context is to erase those histories of violence in the best way it can. You know, I always think about like Wall Street being built over, like Black cemeteries and scenes of places of Black life in New York in the 19th century, and just how like emblematic
they weren't
that
just
is.
built over Black cemeteries, bro. They were built over
of what
Italian
capitalism seems to do,
cemeteries
like,
too.
in a philosophical way too.
A lot of things were built
and
over
specifically
cemeteries.
that like the New York Stock Exchange, and that was specifically built on obviously like indigenous land, and then it was also built by, you know, Black people, and so basically our systems of power were built by
and
slavery
Irish,
to enforce
exactly,
slavery.
Michelle.
And to enforce
Yes.
and the institutionalization of
Inadvertent
whiteness,
land blessing.
basically. Like I think that's maybe a different way of saying it, is like when people talk about the institutionalization of racism, or it's not this, it's hard for, I think, some people to contextualize, because what does it really mean when something is institutionalized? Like, what does it really mean when whiteness or racism is institutionalized? And I don't want to go to that quote really quite quick. I want to stick with the quote that you have, that of what you're saying is like, maybe if I could not hear it, I wouldn't. And I think that's sort of just like the blanket statement that I feel like a lot of maybe well-intentioned but ignorant white people tend to say, is just like, oh, well, like, I don't really know, but like, I'm a good person and I try not to be racist, and I try, basically. And then it becomes more about this whole personal responsibility thing, where it's just like, I'm not racist, so therefore, and collectively, we are all not individually racist, so that means that we're not racist. And it's like, no, well, the institution is racist and we all operate inside the institution. So like implicitly, we all have to be. Like, it's not like, it's like almost sort of a way of like trying to pull away from this idea, I think, of like, I mean, yes, like there is an entire thing to be said about like people not behaving or making microaggressions. I'm not dismissing that, or like not being overly racist or personally racist. I'm thinking just from a collective perspective and from an institutional perspective of what this podcast is talking about, is to say like, you know, the institution was specifically built this way, and it has been built this way since the beginning. So when we say burn it down already, you know, we're saying like,
have you ever considered that you're not really a socialist?
Change to us.
Have you ever considered that?
Still
because these people are very representative of socialists.
It's still a byproduct.
You might not be a socialist.
This system that is still built on whiteness and racism and treating people differently.
Yeah. I was thinking about, this makes me think about an interview I saw last week, just a clip of it with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Now
the governor of Arkansas.
Yes, now governor of Arkansas. And she just issued an executive order banning the teaching of critical race theory in Arkansas schools.
Excellent, Sarah.
She went on Fox News, which I think would like ultimately, I think she perceived it as ultimately being like a friendly network. But even the people on Fox News were like, well, surely you don't mean that that children can't learn at all about like slavery or about sort of the things that quote unquote America has gotten wrong. And she made this comment where she was like, we don't want teachers. Hang
on. This woman thinks that Fox News was defending the teaching of critical race theory. Is that what she's saying? I want to hear what Sarah Huckabee Sanders' response was, but this woman just basically asserted that Fox News was pushing back on Sarah Huckabee Sanders signing an executive order outlining the teaching of critical race theory in schools, as though Fox News supports that. Fox News does not support the teaching of critical race theory in schools. Fox News are shills. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a fan of Fox News or anything. I think they mostly do a horrible job. Well, one thing I'm absolutely sure of is that they are not opposed to Sarah Huckabee Sanders' executive order.
Teachers teaching anything that will make children hate America. We want children to learn that,
Man.
America is the greatest country on earth. And it seemed to me such a telling way of answering the question, which is that like their perception is the only way that you can get people to participate in the institutions is to hide as many of the origins of of those institutions as they possibly can.
So
right?
This woman who is teaching at the University of Washington right now believes that critical race theory is just accurate history. And if you're not teaching critical race theory, you're not teaching accurate history. This woman doesn't know what she's talking about. She is teaching at a college level right now.
Right? Like, yeah.
And also what that speaks to me too is that the only way to quote like America, the United States, is to erase its history and any wrongdoing. And I think that or any sort of actual issues that happen, because I think at the end of the day, people like Governor Huckabee Sanders, I think that they know that if the truth finally gets out there and we do finally start uncovering this on a more global scale or a larger
These people
scale,
think racism has never been taught in schools.
There's no going back from that.
Fucking
right?
morons.
And then their narrative that their built-in narrative that I think the United States people have been brainwashed into since, I would say since the World Wars, have been really just that America is this beacon of hope and this sort of warm apple pie narrative that I think a lot of conservatives run on. They can't run on that narrative anymore, and that's why they have to stomp it out, rather than the potential even from conservatives of being that was really screwed up, let's do something about it, or let's try to do anything about it or admit it. And it also links back to
what was Trump's platinum plan? What wasn't Trump's platinum plan and his opportunity zones the right doing something about it? And for those of you who might not be familiar with me like Comrade Lenin here, I'm not a conservative. I have made shitting on conservatives into an art form because, quite frankly, I think conservatives are fucking lazy and unprincipled. No offense to any conservatives watching. I'm not talking about you in specifically. I'm saying as a collective. I'm saying in general. I think conservatives are lazy and unprincipled and whiners, and they drive me goddamn crazy. However, to say that conservatives have not acknowledged the horrors of racism is just not fucking true, man. It's not true. Trump did more for the black community than Obama did. I'm sorry, he did. That's just reality. Trump putting opportunity zones in previously underserved areas was way more than Obama ever did. Trump was the one who funded historically black colleges and universities permanently. Why didn't Obama do that? So, while they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, to say that conservatives have done nothing is not true. I am absolutely against the book banning. I have spoken extensively against the book banning. I am blocked by Moms for Liberty on Twitter because I've railed against the book banning so much. I think the book banning is retarded. I have said it was a bad idea from the very fucking beginning of the start of the book bans. I don't support it at all in any way. I think it is awful. I think it is such a wasted fucking effort. It solves none of the problem and it sends a horrible message. I'm not in favor of it. Never have been. My record on this is very clear. If you don't believe me, you can search my channel because I've been talking about this for damn near a year now.
The 1619 project as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
which is how the whole critical race theory thing kind of how Republicans started with the banning critical race theory.
No, that's not how Republicans started with banning critical race theory.
So much of the anti-CRT rhetoric too is predicated on like sentiment and emotion that not even necessarily that it will teach children to hate America, whatever that means, but that it will make white children feel bad, right? If they learn about legacies of
slavery. That's not why we're against critical race theory.
Project, right? Is that it's putting this heavy burden on white children.
No, we're against the 1619 Project because it is not historically accurate. It has been debunked on numerous occasions, if for no other reason than the first slaves came to America in the 1500s in Florida. They did not come to Virginia in the 1600s, 1500s in Florida.
And again, it's just that kind of shielding white people from their own history, right? And like asking us as white people to think about like where are we embedded in this? Like, how are we embedded in our own histories? And that's something that seems like that kind of like trauma, or I don't even want to call it trauma, but that kind of like having to live with that complicity is something that is so necessary for white people to like sit with. And it's so it's something that people are so avoidant about too.
Be careful, comrade. I'm going to make you a libertarian before you know it.
Was like,
you're going to be buying guns.
They don't want to do it because they don't want white children to basically feel bad. And the interesting part about that, I actually think isn't necessarily about like, oh, white children can't handle this. To me, it's like, they're like, oh, well, they're going to feel shame for it. And like, there's going to be shame for them associated. And I'm like, is that true though? Like, are white children immediately going to go
they blocked you too, Phil?
Like, because the United States implicitly, like harmed millions of black and brown bodies, like that, like white children are immediately going to jump to this is my fault? Like and also like, then is that the actual emotional response that children are going to have because of it? And there just seems to be like a shame angle here that I feel that
Here is how much Moms for Liberty hates me. Moms for Liberty will block my followers if they tag me and Moms for Liberty in the same fucking tweet. And by the way, the tweet that he was tagging them in was a tweet about how Moms for Liberty endorsed candidates are about on Tuesday to vote for radical gender ideology in school in North Carolina. Those are two candidates that Moms for Liberty fucking endorsed are now putting gender ideology in school policy. And we were trying to alert Moms for Liberty to this, and Moms for Liberty blocked us. Wow. Well, you did call them some stuff. You did do that. You did. But it really does go to show that Moms for Liberty doesn't give an actual fuck about the things that they claim to give a fuck about, which I've been saying for a long time, but I'm really glad to have proof.
It's more about the shame than it is actually about like the acknowledgement that it happened and then the moving on from it, which I feel in a lot of ways actually just stops white people from doing the work or from, being able to be present to things, is because they're so overcome by shame by certain things that they can't move past it. And that seems more of a shame mechanism than it is actually about like, I don't know, like then about the ability for, harm to be like, quote, potential harm to be done to white children.
Yeah, I think when you talk about shame, it brings up this interesting thing for me also, because there's this other narrative about the family, right? And like this is present both in anti-CRT like rhetoric and also like discussion about gender, teaching gender and sexuality in classrooms.
Oh, here we go.
Is somehow destabilizing to the white family, because
No.
it leads white children to question their parents and what they're learning from.
Well, in fact, it's actually probably more destabilizing to the black family than it is to the white family. But that this is an argument. You think that we're against teaching gender ideology to kindergarteners because it leads to kindergarteners questioning their parents? You think that's what it is? No, honey. I'm gonna email this woman and be like, "Can you come on my channel to have a debate?" I'm gonna email her and be like, "I watched your podcast on my channel and I thought it was really great, and I would like you to come and teach me about critical race theory and gender ideology." I'm probably not going to do that, but it might be fun to try.
Their parents. And
I do too, comrade.
I mean, the
You're a
white, like
libertarian.
the family unit is always like, I mean, where do you learn to be white, right?
Nick
Like,
also got
where do you
blocked
first
by
learn to be
wait.
white, right? You
Nick
learn
got
it
blocked
Right.
by Moms for Liberty.
from your
Everyone's
mom and
getting
dad.
blocked
And
by
like
Moms
you
for Liberty.
learn those
Wow.
those things at home. So like it's so destabilizing and threatening to like the white family, which I think is a good thing. But for them, it's incredibly threatening because it again, it's a destabilization of power. If all of a sudden you've got kids being like, well, wait a minute. Like,
why do you want... Oh, she's got her name right there. I didn't even notice that. See, this is why bot's ahead of the curve. Why do you want to destabilize the family? I know why she wants to destabilize the family. Does anyone else know why she wants to destabilize the family? As a reminder, they want to abolish the family. It's in the Communist Manifesto. They want to abolish the family. It's in the fucking book. They want to abolish the family. That's why they don't mind it being destabilized.
like what you're telling me about myself and the world that I live in and our family actually like doesn't make sense now that I know this context. And how do we change this? If you're like a couple of white parents who are exercising that authority in your home, like that's really scary.
And I think that that's why it's so intrinsically linked to Republican rhetoric of like the you know, like the family is being destroyed, and
Yes.
like why like they're like protection of the family and family values, because really what that is it's a guise for white supremacy.
Yes.
It's not an actually guise for...
The family is a guise for white supremacy. I'm sorry. Please pardon me while I make a clip of that. We're going to go back just a little bit and get her talking about the family as well. Hang on. Okay. I'm where I want to clip it from. Record.
Yeah, I think when you talk about shame, it brings up this interesting thing for me also, because there's this other narrative about the family, right? And like this is present both in anti-CRT like rhetoric and also like discussion about gender, teaching gender and sexuality in classrooms, which is like that this is somehow destabilizing to the white family because it leads white children to question their parents and what they're learning from their parents. And I mean, the family unit is always like, I mean, where do you learn to be white, right? Like, where do you first learn to be white, right? You learn it from your mom and dad, and like you learn those things at home. So like, it's so destabilizing and threatening to like the white family, which I think is a good thing. But for them, it's incredibly threatening because it again, it's a destabilization of power. If all of a sudden you've got kids being like, well, wait a minute, like what you're telling me about myself and the world that I live in and our family actually like doesn't make sense now that I know this context. And how do we change this? If you're like a couple of white parents who are exercising that authority in your home, like that's really scary.
And I think that that's why it's so intrinsically linked to Republican rhetoric of like the you know, like the family is being destroyed, and
Yes.
like why like they're like protection of the family and family values, because really what that is it's a guise for white supremacy.
Yes.
It's not an actually guise for actual family values, but they don't know how to actually separate white supremacy from what they think is family values.
Right. because I mean, I don't know if this is going to sound like a bold statement, but I think I said in the last podcast, right, that ultimately the Republican Party is the party of white grievance politics, right? It's it's, I mean, they're always talking, about, how damaging identity politics are so damaging, but like
they're the party
Republicans
of
are a
politics.
white interest. They are an interest group for white people. I mean, essentially, right? If you think about who they serve, right, and the kinds of like theoretical things they're putting forward and their platform, I mean, ultimately, right, it's a party for like white people that own boat dealerships. I mean, that's the demographic. And so, the question is like, how do you function? I mean, what does it say about like about America as it sits right now, that like essentially one of our two major parties is an organization of white supremacy? And you can make the same argument about Democrats, right? But at least they're the Republican Party is not shy about what it is, like.
No. I mean, for those that
Okay, I gotta stop the clip there. That was fucking fantastic. That was better than I ever thought it would be. These people are morons. This is why we actually listen to people, guys, because these people never actually listen to the people they're talking about. They have no effing idea what Republicans actually believe. And again, I'm not a Republican by any stretch of the imagination, but I know more about what Republicans actually believe than these people do. That was crazy.
understand more political theory, I think Democrats are like neoliberalism fascists.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Now that may be a bold statement that that people might not like, but that's definitely how I feel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely agree, and I think it might be a good time to bring in this excerpt that I found while reading this book. I think I mentioned it before. It's called My Grandmother's Hands: Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, by Resmaa Menakem. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt,
right, because
about
they want to eliminate the family.
The setup
Kate
for this is basically about how
congratulations, Kate.
The traumatization of Black bodies was institutionalized in the United States from a very early time. And because of that institutionalization, it has grown into kind of what it is today.
Oh, God. But, Carlin, if you had to pick between a TikTok leftist or a Christian conservative, which would you pick? They're the same fucking thing. They are the same thing. I refuse to choose, Ba. I'm not playing by your rules. I choose neither. I choose to be by myself. Leave me alone. And don't take my stuff.
And why it's also convinced white people to basically participate in it. It says, powerful white people also created formal structures of institutions to reinforce these notions. Black bodies were deliberately presented as straw man for white bodies to blow their ancient historical trauma through. What had been white on white trauma was transformed in carefully calculated fashion into white on Black trauma, which has then been institutionally enforced. This is not an informal shift that has resulted slowly from changing attitudes. It was a deliberate strategy devised to create such changes. Political leaders in Virginia legislated whiteness into existence in America and therefore quickly institutionalized it.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what they say in the 1619 Project. Is that whiteness was created when white people came to America and then built power structures that only served other white people. That's exactly what he just said. White people in Virginia legislated white supremacy. That's what it means.
The first such law appears in 1691. Over the years, all of this provided effective shifting of powers divide from landowners versus workers to white people versus Black people. Today, we would describe it as a work of evil genius. It undermined poor white folks' sense of identity and convinced them to fight against their own interests. It created a false sense in the bodies of many poor white Americans, and it soothed some of the antipathy poor white people felt toward far more powerful, wealthy white landowners. To this day, many white Americans continue to live under the thumb of these delusions. What made the strategy so profoundly effective, ultimately so enduring, is that it simultaneously colonized and recolonized the minds, hearts, and bodies of everyone except for prosperous landowners. Poor white Americans had no voting rights because they did not own land. Nevertheless, they took pride in their status as white people and routinely lorded the status over Black bodies. To maintain the status, many pledged their allegiance to the subservience to plantation owners. Meanwhile, Black people were no longer permitted to own land and no longer able to work their way out of bondage after a specific amount of years.
Yeah.
Zane, cut the anti-Semitic shit right now.
Touches on so effectively.
That's not going to fly here, bro. Sorry.
Racial capitalism is created, right? The importance of race and race making to the capitalist project, because a whole body of unified workers in in a kind of multiracial coalition is something I think that's ultimately one of the most threatening things to the capitalist class. And that kind of making of racial hierarchies and the kind of shifting of cohesive classes, right, is
Zane, I'm putting you in a timeout, and if you keep up the anti-Semitic shit, you're going to get blocked. Don't do it again.
Even now, the function of kind of populist whiteness in
populist
the United
whiteness,
States,
what's that
right?
mean?
Like just the continuing allegiance to systems of power that ultimately are not helping you, right? Like,
but then, yeah, exactly, not helping you. But from like a whiteness perspective, it's like, well, it's not helping me, but I still get enough.
Their spear is
like,
called
I still have some
Who
sort of
Loves
stature
Orange Soda?
To think that like
it's an orange soda
this
beer.
is basically enough for me to just continue on with it. And the preface of before that excerpt, what they had talked about is there was a lot of uprisings happening before that institutionalization happened. And between like class systems, between people that were, I guess, technically now white, but like obviously the whiteness had not really been, quote, like created yet, of like uprisings happening.
How can whiteness be created if it was just about skin color?
The white prosperous landowners were overwhelmed, and they knew that system was never going to work. And so basically, to kind of summarize what that excerpt was, is they're saying, okay, like we're going to basically give white people some managerial like roles on the plantation. Mm-hmm. We're still not going to allow them to actually, vote, or I mean, maybe potentially own land, but and then we're basically going to allow them to have just enough over so that they can hold it over Black people. And then that way that they're not going to want to give up their rights, because they're like, well, I'm getting something and it's still better than nothing.
Yeah. Yes. This makes me think about, when you said the word managerial, it makes me think about, we talked about this, Noel Ignatiev's book, How the Irish Became White. And the kind of the race making process of Irish immigration in the United States, and basically like the way that Irish Catholic immigrants were able to achieve whiteness was through allying themselves to these managerial positions, which is like,
Moms for Liberty blocked my actively unwoke Twitter account. All I did I didn't call them MILFs on my actively unwoke Twitter account. All I did was say, hey, Moms for Liberty, these two school board candidates that you endorsed are about to vote in favor of radical gender ideology in school. Maybe you want to put in a word. That was all I did. I was perfectly nice to them. Moms for Liberty is literally blocking anyone that is pointing out that school board candidates that they endorsed are voting to put radical gender ideology in school. Isn't that liberty oriented of them? I mean, they're allowed to block whoever they want. I've just always said that Moms for Liberty is a shill organization, and I'm just being proven right again and again and again and again and again. Why doesn't Moms for Liberty care that their school board candidates that they endorsed are about to vote gender ideology into school policy. Why don't they care?
Why so many Irish immigrants and their descendants, right, became cops in these, large centers in the urban north, like New York, Boston, because
it was
right,
it was their way of
it's the managerial position of whiteness in the urban north, right, is like becoming a cop, enforcing whiteness and enforcing that hierarchy in that way,
and internalizing their oppression in some ways too, right?
Right.
Like internalizing this idea that they're like, well, it's kind of that saying like, well, like I went through it, so you have to go through it. And not only now did I go through it, so you have to go through it, I'm going to do it too. Like I'm going to be the one that does it to you. And I think that that's kind of what they were talking at the beginning of that excerpt, which was like, it became a mechanism for white people to pass down the white trauma onto Black bodies.
Exactly. I mean, again, like that kind of reenacting that kind of
Carlin is right. Tip jar.
the kind
Pay
of
up.
trauma of that onto.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it.
More marginal people.
I've been saying this shit about Moms for Liberty for a year.
I sometimes get on my TikTok. I get onto like Irish American TikTok, and there'll be a lot of TikToks of kids being like, your ancestors didn't flee imperialism, like for you to become a fucking cop. But it is in some ways like that's what happens, right? Where it's like, how do
exactly. That's why Black cops can be considered white supremacists.
How are people being like? How are people working through that kind of trauma? How do you what are the ways that you can accrue power after like experiencing something like that? And if you're able to aligning yourself with whiteness is a powerful way to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, to the extent that that immigrant groups were able to do that, I think they did. And so for, people who are descendants of those groups, you can be like, oh yeah, like I never owned, I'm not personally racist, or my family never owned slaves or something like that. But that's not the only way that, that's not the only way that works, right? Like you are embedded in your context, and the context is one of choice making, and it's one of, recognizing, your ancestors were able to recognize the way that power functions. And part of any sort of liberatory practice is like you learning the same thing, right? You also need to learn how power functions so you can do something about it, right? Like you need to learn how whiteness is functioning so you can do something about it. So it's very important to have these conversations.
Yeah, two things came up to me when you were talking about that. One was what it talked about earlier in the book as well, is that that a lot of people fleeing to come to what is now the United States had really were leaving because they actually had massive amounts of body trauma during those times.
Tim Pool blocked you.
Torture people.
He also blocked the quartering. The quartering did a video earlier about how Tim Pool blocked him because the quartering won't shut the fuck up about the Eliza Blue stuff. Good. I'm glad Tim Pool blocked the quartering. I feel bad he blocked you. I'm sorry. What'd you do?
Almost for amusement, and it was there was massive amounts of actual trauma that these people have endured, and then they were fleeing from it, and then they came to a new place. But I mean, it's kind of like one of those things too. If you just talk about trauma, just because you leave the place where the trauma is existing, yes, that's step one. But that doesn't mean that your body has processed that trauma.
Oh no,
and
not
so
anyway. I'm not interested.
It's
He's
basically
not
just
smart
been
enough
this
for me.
carried over and over again. And there's been no way. There was no way for those white people to, they didn't know what to do or how to process it. They were just like, oh, I'm going to a new life. And then this institutionalization of whiteness was created as a way for them to hone it and to try to use it in a way where they felt that they were processing it, but in the meantime doing it at the expense of Black and brown bodies.
Yes, yeah, And I think that when
I haven't heard them call
the
them
passage
bodies
about
recently.
sort of the process of white land.
I feel like this is interesting because we watch an awful lot of woke training and presentations on my channel, and usually those things tend to be pretty current. Sometimes they're older, but usually they're pretty current. And it's like, I haven't heard them say the black and brown bodies stuff in a while. So it's kind of like these people are a couple levels behind where the woke are right now, just because I haven't heard this bodies thing in probably a year, but they're using it. And I find calling people calling people bodies is so incredibly dehumanizing. It denies their humanity. It's like their body is all that matters, not what's in their mind, not who they are. It's so bad.
Owners bringing people into the fold, right? The context of that struck me as a sort of kind of colonial era idea, but it's also something that happened in the period of immigration, right? Where it's like with the recognition that people were coming, like you said, with these incredible amounts of trauma, incredible amounts of, escaping incredible repression, imperialism, or something like that. And like, what do you do with all that rage? What do you do with all that anger? And it's very advantageous for the capitalist class to say like, oh, don't direct this anger towards, the structures of imperialism or the structures of capital that oppressed you back wherever you came from, right? Redirect it towards the most marginal, right? Because you are part of our cohesive, we will make you part of our cohesive class. We'll allow some people, to go to college, or allow some of you to get attain high power jobs. So you feel as if you're part of us, and redirect it towards those people, right, who are threatening your access, who you can perceive as threatening your access to that way of life.
And to speak to like the power dynamic about how that definitely 100% still plays out in today's dynamics of like how power dynamics work in the United States. Like, when the Civil Rights Act was passed and all of, those bills were passed, like that is when a majority of white, like typically poor white people became like switched parties and became, and became more conservative because they felt that their power was like literally delinquishing, because we have to go back to the inception of like, this is the rootedness of ancestor upon ancestor upon ancestor thinking that their power relies on hurting and harming other people. And that they're not even aware that they're doing it, so much to the effect that they think that they are being harmed because someone else is now getting something equivalent to what they have. And that is, that is still, like, as you just said, of like, the Republican Party.
I love it how these people are literally calling black and brown people black and brown bodies, as in completely extricating them of all their humanity. And yet it's the poor white people who join the Republican Party that are the real problem. It's the poor white people that are the real white supremacists, not these people who are calling black people a body.
Party is the white grievance party. I mean, that literally is like the Republican Party, to my opinion, is the manifestation of all of this.
Yes. And you see that in the fact that they have no coherent platform, right? Like there's no, their platform is owning the libs. And what that means, right, is performing that particular kind of white grievance politics.
It's not their platform at all. They don't have a platform. To be fair, the Republican Party literally has no platform.
Like that, right? But
it's definitely not owning the libs.
Like I said,
that's the same code word for saying like, we're of the people. And as long as you align with us as the rich, elite, wealth, whatever, then you're going.
Hang on. No, the Republican Party doesn't have a platform because they've been too fucking lazy to update it. They have not updated their party platform since 2010. And that's the Republican Party's fault. It's not because they're individuals. They have a platform. It's just they haven't updated their platform since 2010, and they keep making excuse after excuse after excuse about why they haven't updated their fucking platform. They basically refused to update it when Trump got nominated for president because they were being spiteful about the whole thing. And then in 2020, they didn't have their convention because of COVID. And so they didn't update it then. They still haven't updated their platform, all because they were spiting Trump.
Going to think that though these things being taken away from us is being taken away from you when it's not.
Right. Exactly. And, that, and people always say, well, this doesn't, they're in disarray, it's a lack of coherence.
There is a lack of coherence.
But I don't think it is. Like, I think that they are really clear about what they're doing. I certainly think someone like Matt Gaetz is very clear in what he's doing.
Matt Gaetz is fucking awesome.
Up House proceedings.
Yes.
It's like you're very clear in what that's doing, which is that if the government does not, if the government's making even small attempts at representing more than this moneyed white class, like, the government doesn't deserve to function, right? Like, that.
You realize he was holding up his own party, right?
Content with burning it down, right? I mean, in
Matt Gaetz is absolutely content with burning it down.
A bizarro way from how we're talking about it, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, they're seeking, I think, to reattain that kind of white hierarchy as it existed at.
Rachel, you are a college professor, and you don't understand that Matt Gaetz was holding up the Republican Party. He was not holding up the Democrat Party. He was holding up the Republican Party, which you have already said is the party of white grievance and white supremacy. So why would you care if Matt Gaetz was holding up the Republican Party? You are a fucking college professor, bro. I'm sorry, misgendered. Ma'am, I don't know. I don't know what the female version of bro is. Bruh? I don't know, but she's a fucking college professor. I can't.
As it existed in the very roots of this country. Yeah.
And this is the thing that I feel is important to note too, is because any sort of representation that is then brought up is considered to be like the worst thing for the Republican Party, and they treat it as if it's like the world is burning down, when it's just like simple matters of trying to have representation in a still like
Can we just talk about, like, I just want to relive. I'm reliving right now that moment where Kevin McCarthy really thought that he was about to win the Speaker of the House, and then Matt Gaetz voted present, and then they all surrounded him. That was one of the best things to ever happen in Congress, was that second to last vote before Kevin McCarthy became Speaker of the House. And Matt Gaetz was like,
capitalist system. And this is why I find that approach of how I view certain people wanting to work within the system to provide more representation. It's not that I'm saying that that shouldn't happen, but I'm saying that that's still not going to get us where we want to go, which is complete equity, or like or the decolonization and de-whiteness of our system. And like just adding representation to a capitalist white system is not still going to get us where we want to go.
Right. Because the institution itself also is rooted in those things, right? Which is why I think I think just saying like, okay, the way that we fix this problem is just to bring in more quote unquote diversity, whatever that.
Bingo too. Congratulations, Kate. Well done.
It's incomplete because it's not accounting for the structural, the structural aspects of it. And it's not accounting for the fact that, anyone can go into an institution.
Oh, it's a fancy bingo,
right? And
I'll accept it.
Exercise their power in horrible ways because the institution itself makes that possible, right? The institution itself is allied to whiteness. Doesn't necessarily matter what body is, anyone. It's like anyone can push the button that launches the drone.
The system itself is allied to whiteness It doesn't matter what the body is. Whiteness is not about skin color. It is about who owns the power structure, who is the landlord, who is the CEO, who is the bourgeoisie, who is the capitalist.
Right, but it's the how they got there in the first place, why they're pushing the button that launches the drone, right? That's ultimately where attention needs to be focused, rather than on bringing in somebody who, you know, represents some kind of DEI thing into that space. Yeah.
Yes. I just want to say yes to that a lot, and hopefully, like, if you're watching or listening, like, rewind and listen to Rachel say that again. But I do want to get to one more quote here that we had pulled up from. I just finished reading the last 10 pages of Post-Colonial Astrology by Alice Barclaycott, and there was this excerpt that I found really quite interesting that I wanted to share. It says, "If there is anti-racial work to be done, we must accept that race does not exist in the colonies, but that race is something in which whiteness implements upon the colonies. Thus, anti-racist work can only and must be done inside of whiteness. The problem with race is whiteness."
Mhm.
I think that kind of speaks to a
It's
little
almost
bit of
like
what you
race
just said.
and whiteness is not the same thing.
But really, you know, really speaks to, like, what really needs to be done is to talk about how whiteness is impacting all of this, and instead of it being like, oh, like, here's this thing that has happened. Anyway, yeah, go. You open it up for you to say what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think what that quote points out really nicely is just the fact that whiteness
Kate, you're
is a
going for
mechanism,
blackout.
right,
Mhm.
through which other forms of, like, social order are created and made.
Whiteness is a mechanism by which other forms of social order are made. Whiteness is not about skin color. We have got to stop talking about it as though it's about skin color. The fact that they are white do not matter because they are not referring to your skin color. No, you're probably not the only one playing. People are playing. Sometimes people just people just don't shout out bingo or stuff like that. I would keep playing, Kate. Who cares? Go for the blackout.
And I think sometimes people
Sometimes
are
people
really
play and they don't
uncomfortable
announce
talking
it.
about whiteness for a couple of reasons. I think the first is that they feel that somehow it's centering white people, which I think is it's my critique of that, right, is that whiteness has been considered so, like, self-evident for so long. It hasn't been worth questioning. It hasn't been worth talking about. It hasn't been worth, like, poking at that mechanism and seeing, like, what's being created, right? And that's something that post-colonial and decolonial scholars have done really well, is looking at the way that whiteness itself is a construct, right? That whiteness itself was made and set out in the world to do particular things and shape particular kinds of people. And you can't talk about everything that comes after without being willing to have those conversations. And my other feeling about it, right, is that
So what they believe is that everything that is oppressive is whiteness and everything that is oppressed is not whiteness. I think that answers your question. Basically, if you are an owner of power, then you have whiteness. If you are not an owner of power, then you do not have whiteness.
this is in some ways a job that white people have been really shitty at talking about whiteness as a particular kind of function. And so, you know, part of that is to think about complicity, right? To think about where we're at. And I don't think, you know, I don't think guilt is a really, like, productive or generative emotion, but you do have to just recognize that you don't get to where you are by yourself, right? Like, you come in with all of your ancestral and all of your, you know, contextual baggage. You bring that with you wherever you go. And so when we talk about whiteness and when we talk about race making, I think part of it is also an attempt to understand our own contexts and how we live now, right? So that's the sort of idea that anti-racist conversations need to happen within whiteness, I think is that would be my interpretation of it.
Yeah. You know, I think that something that came up for me based on what you said is like, you know, it's okay to feel guilty and then just do the next thing. Like it's like it's okay that guilt is happening. It's okay that you feel guilt. It's like it's sort of like that's fine, and like you get to and then the thing, right? Like whatever the thing is. Because ultimately just wallowing in guilt about something isn't actually helping to deconstruct anything. It's just then getting tied.
Hang on. We do not use this term on my channel, Zane. We do not use it here. Please do not use the anti-W term. It comes from very bad people. I do not allow that shit on my channel. I do not want to attract those people to my channel. If you don't know that, I understand, because I understand why people think that's okay. On my channel, it's not, because that terminology comes from people on the far right that I do not want to be associated with. So I'm just asking for your respect in that. Call it something else, but don't use that term, please.
Back in another person's individual emotions about something, which I think is why some people talk about, you know, talking about whiteness being sort of centering white people, because if it ends up being about white people then feeling guilty about it, then, you know, then it's like, how do you help them through that guilt? And it's like, just accept it.
Yeah.
But like, but then it doesn't have to be an ownership of like, it also doesn't have to be an ownership of like, oh, like this is like, yes, like you come from ancestors that did this. And yes, like there is acknowledgement in that. And also like it, like, and you, what are you doing now? Like, how can you work with what is happening? Like I think that's kind of the really integral sort of piece in that.
Yeah. Because if it's something,
you can say racism. I recommend racism, because all racism is racism. Like, white people don't need a special brand of racism. But remember, again, whiteness is not about the color of your skin. You can have light skin and not be white in these people's eyes, right? And so I would just use anti-white. We do not use that term on my channel at all. To be fair, I don't use anti-black either. I think that all racism is racism is racism is racism is racism. And white people don't need a special term for racism.
That's not,
nor
you know,
do
if
black
it's something
people.
that was made, it can also be unmade, right? And I don't think that white people can't be like a passive party in that, you know, and so that I think is where, you know, the
term anti-idiot is acceptable. I am very anti-idiot.
It opens up, I think, a space that can be quite liberatory, you know, rather than necessarily shameful, because it's like, if you understand that there was construction there, you can think,
because
right,
most of them are racist,
right? Like, what is my role in deconstructing?
A lot of racists use that term. You can be racist on the right or racist on the left.
In understanding what I can do in the space of liberatory politics. Like to me, I think it can be really freeing.
Actively Unwoke at gmail.com.
Right? To understand that
bingo,
that's something at work. And that's what I see in my students all the time. Who I think are, you know, they're sort of right around the age where, you know, Sarah Huckabee Sanders would be like, these kids are feeling, you know, they're ashamed or guilty. Like, they never seem ashamed or guilty to me. You know, I think when we talk about these things, they see it as really freeing. And, you know, and when they can talk about it, they can begin to see paths forward. And so, you know, for my white students, I think it can be really helpful.
Why are you teaching this? You are an expert in Southeast Asia. Why are you even teaching this?
For them to be, just from talking to them, you know, being in a space where they're able to talk about their relationship with whiteness and the way that they feel that kind of that scream of the present, like Savara Nolan says, is also quite liberatory. I mean, I think it produces solidarity. That's been my experience when we can talk about these things openly.
Which comes back to the whole point we talked about before, is that like race was basically created as a hierarchical way to prevent solidarity.
Right, exactly. And when we break those constructions down, or we see what their impact has been, you can kind of be like, well, wait, this is not just the way things are, right? There's an opportunity for making new worlds here, making new ways of being with each other. And I think that's something that, I mean, I guess it's sort of like giving birth, you know, like it's something that is painful, I think is painful, but ultimately can be pretty beautiful. If you're willing to like be in the truth with it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, like that kind of, you know, that you're kind of doing that work with your students and that they're experiencing that, you know, as well. I mean, like you're the one that the conservatives hate, I guess.
Oh yeah, no, all the time I'm like, this was the day I get on Tucker Carlson. You know, it's like, I think it's, you know, but it just never strikes me as particularly like subversive. To me, I'm just being, you know, it's like you have to be honest. Like
right.
You have to.
Conservatives don't feel any way about you, honey.
Truth or nothing changes, you know? And so like part of this is just being like, to what extent are you willing to discuss what you see in front of you? Yeah. Because like I said, like people, like I've said before, people have this knowledge, like they feel it, like they know it, but it's just, they have to feel you know, they have to feel like they're liberated enough to talk about it. And that can be what's hard, because there's so much of this, you know, there's this sort of enduring legacy of like, it's threatening to power to have that, to talk about that. And that's like scary and dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I think that when we're talking about, you know, burn it down already, and we're talking about how, you know, I guess like the fascists have their own version of that. Like our version of this is like you having those, I mean, I'm not you, but like you're an example of how that is an example of burn it down, and that you're trying to create a different structure. You're trying to talk about that truth so that there can be healing, and then we can have a collective understanding of solidarity to move forward.
Right.
And then that is another quote example of what, you know, what we really mean when we say, you know, burn it down already, because that then disrupts the system. It disrupts the system of capitalism and its intrinsicness of whiteness.
Right. Exactly. You know, I think that
it disrupts the system of capitalism and its intrinsicness of whiteness.
Fascists burn it down from like a more liberatory burn it down is that, you know, the fascist burn it down is one which is dependent on denying people their full dignity and their full worth. And a liberatory one, I think, is moving towards that space of being like, the institutions have a vested interest in denying people that dignity and worth. And for us, that supersedes the institutional power.
How do the institutions have a race?
Inherent human dignity.
Huh.
And so, you know, that world that you're working towards is one that is a radical recognition of that, despite, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years of social construction that are predicated on denying that dignity. So.
Yeah. I know we're getting really close to time here, so there is one more quote I actually wanted to share from Post-Colonial Astrology that came up based on what you were saying, and I think it's interesting. It says, colonization is often depicted as clean, as reform, as liberating. Decolonization is often framed as destructive and violent. However, Jody Bird writes that decolonization is not destructive, rather it is a grieving process that restores life. Rather than framing justice for American Indians as the four horsemen accompanying the apocalyptic plague and famine, it is time to imagine indigenous colonization as a process that restores life and allows settler, arrivant, and native to apprehend and grieve together the violences of the U.S. empire. Rather than seeing decolonization through the Western biblical imagery, we must expose the violence of colonization as what it is. Berg writes that the story of the New World is horror, the story of America is crime. There's more there that I could go into, but there's...
It doesn't surprise me at all because we've literally watched this on Socialism Saturday. So it does not surprise me in any way, shape, or form that Marxists are in favor of arming themselves, because we've watched presentations where Antifa is literally talking about arming themselves.
It basically says, revolution grieves, revolution restores life. There is no revolution without indigenous sovereignty. Revolution is not death, but life that survives the death distributed by the colonizers.
Yeah, it's so. Yeah, I think if we had more time, I would have liked to talk a little bit about like the way that the environment also.
Not much longer. We're almost done.
The Anthropocene. Maybe that's for a different episode. But
Yeah.
I think this idea of like, this is actually a life-giving thing. Like what colonization has done ultimately is deny life, right? It's denied the full spectrum of life.
In what way?
And in a tangible way, like part of colonization is also in destruction of not just sort of forms of sociality, but actually like the world around us, right? The environment. So like, and that's something that falls, there's an inequity on the way that falls on Black and brown people. And so part of decolonization, I think, is like pushing back against the Anthropocene, like confronting it and saying like, for a lot of people, the end of the world has been here for a long time, and how to push back on that. And I think decolonization is a way of trying to push back on that. And yeah, like the quote says, like restoring life in a myriad of different ways.
And recognizing that, the New World is a story of horror, that the true America is crime. And like, I think that's like, that is what, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is trying to prevent so badly from everyone learning. Because that is the first step in the decolonization process. And like, and I think that's kind of a full circle, but, I know we're getting right here towards the end, and I just wanted to see if there's anything else you have left to say about this episode.
No, thank you for opening space for this. And I think that this, hopefully I think we'll be able to have more discussions about decolonization and about what that looks like, in future episodes. That we think we'll do an episode really talking about colonization and imperialism and the way that fits into sort of capitalism as a whole. No, but otherwise,
everything bad is capitalism.
Thank you everyone for listening.
All right.
Just a reminder that you can find us on Instagram.
Ooh, they're on Instagram.
Pod. Also on Twitter at BurnItPod.
Really?
And you can follow us on Spotify.
But we can find them on Twitter.
We're just about everywhere.
And also, let us know what you thought of the episode.
2 followers on Twitter, and I'm
on
fairly
Spotify,
certain it's going to be the 2 of them. It is the 2 of
them.
them.
So if you're like, oh, this made sense, or this was really interesting, or I wanted to know more about that, you can reply to that on the Spotify episode if you go into the episode on Spotify. And then also we'll submit a poll for each episode as well.
Oh, God.
Yes.
You guys have got to see this. Oh my God. Okay, this is basically done. Let me show you Blake's Twitter profile. Rachel is her tweets are protected. I wonder if I get everyone should go and follow Rachel on Twitter to see who she'll let us in, who she'll let see her tweets. But look at fucking Blake's Twitter profile. I'll make it bigger. I'm a queer astrologer seeking to help dismantle internalized patriarchy and colonialism. He's a fucking astrologer. Oh no. I'm gonna have to tell Joshua. Joshua's profession is sullied. He's gonna be so upset. And then Rachel's Twitter account is private, and she is a PhD studying gender and the far right in India and America, pop art apologist, Hebrew hillbilly, bad taste is praxis, she, her, Black Lives Matter, Palestinian flag. I'm really glad that we found Blake and Rachel. I think Blake and Rachel are the type of people that we should listen to every once in a while because they do actually speak in like normal English, so they're relatively easy to understand, but they're so fucking woke. Like, woke is off of the charts. All right, guys, that is going to wrap it up for this Socialism Saturday. We do this every Saturday on my channel at 6 p.m. I hope you'll join us in the future. And as a reminder, please make sure you're subscribed to my Substack. If you go to my Substack right now, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com, you're going to see this Unwoke Roundup newsletter in which you can basically get an overview of all the content that I've done this week, explaining why whiteness does mean capitalism, which I think we saw a lot of today. I also did a stream about that. I wrote a Woke Mind article about why they're addicted to outrage. I explained how outrage addiction works. You can check that out. I launched the next workshop in my Unwoke Your Work series. It's going to be great. Go and learn about it. We talked about 86 Democrats in Congress voting in favor of socialism. That was pretty great. And I have exclusive audio of a county GOP leader browbeating and threatening a conservative mom running for school board because he didn't want that conservative mom to be, well, conservative. And now 2 Moms for Liberty endorsed candidates on the same school board are going to vote on Tuesday, probably, unless they get pressured into doing otherwise, into putting radical gender ideology in middle school. So that tells you exactly how effective Moms for Liberty is when they choose and endorse their candidates, because 2 of them got elected to the school board in New Hanover County, North Carolina, and now they're about to endorse radical gender ideology in middle school. You can read all that and more on my One Woke Roundup newsletter. And if you become a paid supporter on my Substack, you can scroll down to the bottom under supporter perks. Make sure you join us for movie night tomorrow in my supporter Discord. You can also join us for 2 community Zoom calls. These perks are open to people who support my work on Locals, on Patreon, and on Substack. And I will see you guys tomorrow for movie night. We're watching Romancing the Stone. And now I'm going to take my leave and enjoy the rest of my orange soda beer. Cheers, guys. Thank you for joining. Mount that like button on the way out the door. And yeah, I mean, we love you all. Even the communists who showed up tonight, the communists were so polite. How great is that? All right, guys, take care. We'll see you tomorrow.